Good evening, everybody. We're going to get going in 1 second here. Looks like Shauna is joining us now as well. Okay, Lizzie, you all set?
Yes.
Great. Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for a design subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today's date is Tuesday, August 20th, and this is session B of the BCDC Design Subcommittee. Lizzie, if you want to hit record if you haven't already. The planning department is continuing to host public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. My name is Seth Reisman, Deputy Director of Design Review at the City of Boston Planning Department. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, please be aware that the commission staff is making an audio and video recording of this meeting. Please turn off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. For the purposes of the record, commissioners present are Mimi Love, Anne Marie Lubenow, Bill Ron, Shauna Gilly-Smith, and Mi-Kyung Kim. And we are expected to be joined by David Hassin at some point in the evening. Tonight's agenda will include presentations for Wentworth Institute of Technology 10-year IMP, which is an 80D approval, joint 10-year institutional master plans for the Dana-Farber and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, also an 80D approval, and Faneuil Gardens in Brighton, a 121A master plan located at 89 Faneuil Street in Brighton, an 80B approval. Tonight's proceedings will follow the typical BCDC Design Subcommittee meeting format, beginning with a brief presentation from the proponent, followed by comments from BCDC commissioners, followed by public testimony. So hopefully the team from Wentworth has been elevated to presenter. For Wentworth, a proposed institutional master plan seeking Article 80D IMP entitlement contemplates 893,000 square feet of development in 6 proposed institutional projects. This will be the third presentation of the proposed IMP to the Design Subcommittee following introduction at the June 27th, 2023 monthly meeting and subsequent Design Subcommittee meetings on May 21st and July 23rd, 2024. Commissioners Easley, Manfredi, Morris, Kotorides, Ron, and Solano were present at the most recent Design Subcommittee meeting and recommending the proposed project for additional review in Design Subcommittee. Commissioner Ron joins us this evening and should be prepared to deliver remarks at the start of deliberation. Commissioners Hassin has recused themselves from deliberation. Commissioner Gilly-Smith, are you also recused from this one? She may not be with us. It is my understanding that there are no other commissioners present at the time who intend to recuse themselves. A reminder to proponent teams that presentations will be limited to 15 minutes. Planning department staff will give presenters a halftime warning. And with that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. My name is Gautam Sundaram, and I will be sharing the screen. Presentation. Okay, I assume you can see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you. So I'll be presenting an update on the Wentworth Institutional Master Plan. As Seth has framed the overall agenda for today, this is a follow-up from our recent presentation that we had with the BCDC Design Committee. And the focus for today's presentation was on the overall massing. We had a presentation on the open space last time, and the goal was to focus more on about how the massing starts to not only frame the context, but also how it relates to framing a lot of the key aspects of this master plan. So we'd like to walk you through with some of the big ideas that reinforce those aspects, what are some of the key design drivers, and how that has driven the overall massing and context as well. Some comments that we heard from you last time is to elaborate further on the massing as it responds to the overall plan. What is the overall hierarchy of the pedestrian circulation? This was shared with you during the last open space presentation. I described the overall historical significance as we relate to the campus development to the surrounding context and some of the character of the public spaces. And we went through a detail on the open space and the character of these public spaces at our last design committee as well. So with that, the focus being really to share with you more about how the big ideas inform the massing. And just as a reminder, some of you may have seen this before, is there are three big ideas driving the overall campus master plan. The first is to really reimagine our civic presence, and as the Wentworth campus really starts to engage with the surrounding context, but to really reimagine Drexel Street as a key part of that civic presence. To really integrate, the second big idea was about integrating this through a series of open space framework that is not just within the Wentworth campus, but then ties all the way from the fence through a series of framed open spaces, Evans Way Park through the campus and all the way out towards the Southwest corridor. And then the third big idea is to really blur the boundaries of the campus itself and to really reimagine the edges of the campus, specifically as we think about the public realm and the streetscape that really frame the overall campus. So with those three big ideas in mind, here you see in this graphic a slide that shows you the existing conditions to the left-hand side, and the right-hand side shows you the proposed institutional master plan. It also highlights in pink what are some of the proposed buildings as Seth described as part of the IMP. But one of the significant aspects that I want to bring to your attention is the transformation of what this campus master plan is about. It's about transforming the what are existing surface parking areas into a series of green spaces, in reimagining the front and that civic lawn space into much more of a community park. And through many of these aspects about why these open spaces are critical is because we see them to be the anchors of creating a series of communities. And those communities are framed by architecture, by creating diverse uses, but also with active spaces within that ground floor. And that's what we feel is the true essence of how we're trying to elevate the learning experience at the Wentworth campus is around creating a series of these communities itself. At a very simplistic sort of party diagram, in this figure ground diagram, what you see is highlighting the overall figure ground of the Wentworth campus itself, but you then start to see what some of those big ideas are: the key green spaces, reimagining of the front, reimagining of a series of open spaces that transform the existing west parking lot into a new open space that's framed by residential buildings. A new, what we call as the Wentworth, the formal axes, a connection that's not just a visual plan connection, but a connection that is much more around accessibility. To reimagine what has been called as the pike into a really wide pedestrian promenade that connects all the way from the fence towards the Southwest corridor. And each of these open spaces themselves are very unique in their character and in their programming itself. While we imagine the front to be really a commons, a park that brings the surrounding community together, programmed in a number of different ways, but then also these interior open spaces to be framed by residential and academic buildings around the Grove to be more around an informal study, a space of respite. The Quad, which has always been described as the heart of the campus, as a place of bringing the Wentworth community together around graduation, celebration, and many other types of events. And then the Stage, which is a academic green space that is framed by academic buildings on all sides by the replacement of the annex building, and then creating new community gardens that really start to engage some of the housing and our neighbors on the east side as part of that overall open space framework. And really imagining this as a series of green spaces that are framed and make that connection towards the Southwest corridor. So focusing more on the massing. And so I talked about this formal axis, the Wentworth axis, which is highlighted here, is to really reimagine that as a way of a connection that you could imagine students, potential parents, prospective students and other dignitaries to really come off of Ruggles Street as this main entrance through a new pavilion that makes this Wentworth Hall accessible and have this pedestrian connection that brings you into the heart of the campus. This is a connection that we can't have today, but it's being enabled by the addition of the pavilion that becomes as a way to really create a welcome center and make that strong connection coming in. And that quad itself is now framed by existing academic buildings like the CES and the BD Hall, which is a student center, and a library, but then also has a new academic building. And now it starts to be really framed by all sides with active uses that really make a strong relationship between the inside and the outside. And here is that same massing showing you this in section about the relationship about all of those buildings that start to frame that main central quad, that connection coming off of the main front lawn through the pavilion, through Wentworth Hall into the quad framed by the academic building and BD Hall itself. I'll walk you through the other residential buildings and their heights in the next section. Here it starts to break down into what are some of the key program elements within each of these academic buildings. The height is in relationship to BD Hall as well, and it's sized to accommodate the architecture of School of Design, and that is really seen as an academic footprint, very similar in character with the types of spaces that you see in the existing CEIS Hall as well. And the Welcome Pavilion, about 50 feet in height, as a great way to really create that welcome center. And a key part of that framing for that pavilion was to also make sure that we are sort of creating this edge that relates to the Wentworth Hall, as you can see in the facade next to it, but then also maintains the visibility to the eaves and the Wentworth Hall itself. And so we deliberately sort of masked and positioned that height as a way to maintain the visibility to Wentworth Hall. The other aspect was this visual connection to the visual connection to the Greek Orthodox Church itself, and to really have the civic lawn that's now framed by the Greek Orthodox Church and the pavilion and Wentworth Hall as a great way to frame it and maintain those views. So those have been some key drivers as how we think about the massing of the pavilion as it relates to the surrounding context. As I mentioned earlier, a key part of that pavilion was to make the building accessible. But we didn't want to just make it about an accessibility connection, but a way of celebrating what the students, what Wentworth is about, in celebrating that work of innovation through event spaces, gallery spaces, and really making that work on display as a way to not only engage with the broader community, but also as a way to make everybody that passes through as part of that journey in understanding the Wentworth experience and the student work. The second very important axis is around the open spaces itself. And so as you see this in this three-dimensional massing view, the fence, Evansville Park, and then we have the open space in front of the existing treehouse along Huntington Avenue, is we have a series of open spaces that are framed by the residential buildings and the academic building. Then we've got the main quad that I just talked to you about, and then the additional quad and green space by the replacement of the annex building that is now framed by the existing Ira Allen and two new academic buildings. So really,
Adam, that's about halftime.
Sure, thank you. And so this is really setting up a series of open spaces that are now framed by a series of these program buildings. And here you can start to see that in section. Here is the existing treehouse in height about 260 feet, the residential tower that not only has a presence on Huntington Avenue, but it also helped frame this green space and the quad and the relationship of that core academic building as well as it relates to the Grove themselves. And then the quad I talked about that is now framed by the CES and the academic building, and then the additional green space that is now framed by the academic building as well. And here you start to see a series of the program elements that are part of each of these different buildings that are framing these open spaces. The open spaces themselves at the ground plane are framed by, we've tried to really make sure that they have a series of active spaces, whether you're in the residential building, so this is the green space, the Grove, which will have living rooms and co-working spaces. The academic building will have co-working maker spaces at the ground floor, conference rooms. And then the residential building will have like an urban living room as a pavilion at that ground floor, really activating and making sure that the ground plane itself is very active, not just inside and outside. The main quad itself is framed by not only Wentworth Hall with a new pavilion at the end that brings access, but then also the maker spaces in that academic building, really making that relationship on both sides of that green space. And then finally, as we come across towards from the CS building across Parker Street, is by replacing the annex building and this new green space that not only does it frame all of the academic spaces on the ground floor in the three buildings, we also have the strong pedestrian connection that would take you all the way out to the Alastair public housing as well, and to the southwest corridor beyond, really making this campus as permeable as possible. The third big idea was around strengthening our civic presence. So I've talked to you about how we're strengthening our civic presence along Drexel Street with this new lawn and the pavilion, and how we really reinforce that edge. But another very important part is how we are framing our presence along Huntington Avenue. And so a key part of this was exceeding the Avenue of the Arts guidelines to make sure that we have no shadow cast from any of the buildings proposed along Huntington Avenue or any of the buildings on the Emerald Necklace at any point of the year. In addition, how do we start to really reimagine our presence along Huntington as a way to not only reinforce the street condition and the street wall and activity on the ground floor, but also taking advantage of creating our presence. I'll walk you through a series of vignettes that start to explain that. The first is all the way on the southern end of Huntington Avenue, this is Ward Street beyond, is the new replacement for the Baker Hall with a taller mass at that corner with active edges along the ground floor to really start to set up this first moment where you start to see the Wentworth presence, and to really see that as a way of sort of really creating a stronger presence along Huntington Avenue with a strong street wall with active uses on the ground floor and the streetscape. As you continue beyond, here you see the tree house, but then reimagining the green space as I shared with you earlier, but then also opening up these strong connections. This pedestrian promenade, which was previously the spike as a circuitous pathway, is now reimagined as a wide promenade that would take you all the way out towards the southwest corridor. And then reimagining the streetscape too, but also stepping back the building massing for the residential tower that not only exceed the Avenue of the Arts guidelines, but then also start to create a presence and showing activity as a way of energizing that overall streetscape. And as I continue to walk along that street, this is starting to show you how we are increasing that permeability with that wider promenade going into the core of the campus with at least a 25 feet minimum width of this pedestrian promenade lined with green spaces and mural walls on either side to really make this campus much more permeable and also accessible from Huntington Avenue. And then continuing that walk along, to my right is the Treehouse building, but then also looking at opportunities about how we make these open spaces more accessible as well. So here you can start to see into the Grove, that first open space. But then you also see around the ground floor opportunities for retail and other active uses along Huntington Avenue to really make that much more dynamic on all sides, to engage people, to create places for pause, and also for the campus to be far more permeable. And as I continued to walk along and all the way out to the intersection of Huntington and Ruggles, here is where to really set the stage of what could be a very dramatic view of this entry towards the Wentworth campus with what is reimagined as a new park, but in some ways engaging the fire station as well, and new streetscape along Huntington Avenue is really starting to create that foreground about how we are framed on all sides with this new park and civic presence itself, and taking advantage of our opportunities that we have along Huntington Avenue as a way to really build on that. An overall street elevation as it starts to show you in height that here is our proposed residential tower as it relates, and it's lower than the existing treehouse, lower than the 500 Huntington development as well, and really paying attention to how we tie that overall massing and height to the buildings around us as well. And so this is sort of showing you in that relationship. This is a graphic that you've seen before. I don't mean to go in through all of the dimensions, but this has been a diagram that we have worked very hard with the BPDS staff and team to make sure that all of the massing is inclusive of all of the mechanical spaces and appurtenances, but also does not cast any shadow on the Emerald Necklace at any given point of time. And here is just sort of a snap of that analysis showing you during December 21st and the worst case scenario to make sure that there is no shadow cast on the Emerald Necklace at any point of time today. And then finally, stepping back and looking at that overall massing that I've just shared with you in context to all of the uses here, the blue highlighting many of the academic and administration uses, the pink highlighting the student life. But here you can start to see how we're really merging different uses that anchor each of those green spaces and community spaces itself as a way to really not only make a very active and a vibrant campus, but also reimagine our presence on all edges of Ruggles, Huntington, Ward, and Parker Street. And here's a view sort of at the overall as a rendering, looking at the entire massing.
And perfect timing got him.
I think I'm getting this down set.
Thank you very much. And there's the time. Before I turn it over to the commissioners, I think as we mentioned at the start, Commissioner Ron was at the previous subcommittee meeting, and we're in one of a fairly unique circumstance where a lot of the commissioners attending tonight were not participating or did not participate in that earlier subcommittee meeting, which, as Gautam mentioned, was primarily focused on larger urban design, network connectivity, pedestrian connections, open spaces, roadway connections. And the recommendation for this evening had been to focus on the massing, which we just simply did not have time to get to at the last presentation. So I guess I'd like to turn it over to the commissioners now, and if certainly I'll defer to Mimi, but if Bill has any thing to add or clarify to my statement encapsulating the previous session.
Bill, you ready to open it up? Yeah.
Well, sure. I think when the group met last, there were a couple questions. Unfortunately, these questions are detailed, so let me back up. Just one quick informative question, Gaston. Can you show me where the north arrow is in this drawing so that we understand how none of these buildings impact Huntington Avenue in terms of shadow?
So north is this way. Let me go to a plan view so I'll make it easier. Sorry. Oops. Second, I'll just pull it up the plan view.
Well, my question was simply a point of information. So,
So here you can see the north arrow.
yeah, so my question is, with that north arrow, some of these tall buildings along what I'd call the south side of Huntington Avenue cast shadows on Huntington Avenue. Do they not?
They will cast some shadow, but we are replacing some existing buildings here too. So there's an existing Baker Hall that we're replacing. Of course, this taller mass is needed.
Well, it's just a point of information. Maybe I misunderstood you. I thought I understood you to say that these new buildings do not cast shadows on Huntington Avenue.
No, I said that, and I apologize if I wasn't being very clear, is that they do not cast any shadow on the Emerald Necklace.
I see, but they cast shadows on Huntington Avenue.
They do cast shadows on Huntington Avenue, as many of these existing buildings do, but they do not cast any shadow on the Emerald Necklace at any given point. As you remember from the Avenue of the Arts guidelines, that we have exceeded that.
Okay, so then let's maybe go back to the final drawing you were showing. If you're asking me to kind of summarize what was said.
Sorry, don't mean to make you dizzy, but
I thought you closed on an overall drawing.
yes, I'm just getting to that.
This may be it. So I know that there were some questions raised, and I think we welcome other commissioner views. One issue is how one gets from Ruggles Street, passing through the campus, moving towards the southwest, I guess I would say. And in other words, we understand the axes going parallel to Ruggles, the axis parallel to Ward and whatever the intermediate street is, and we understand the perpendicular one coming into the main entrance of the Wentworth, the central building. But my question is the ones moving from Ruggles through the campus in that direction are complicated because one, the gathering place or the welcome place in front of the traditional main building is all at one level and requires you to climb stairs to get through the building and then descend stairs going out the other side. Right? Am I correct?
That's existing where you have we have an existing series of steps that take you up. But what we have proposed with our pavilion is that it'll be an accessible entrance. So that stairs shown was like more like an amphitheater, but it's an accessible entrance that would allow you to come all the way through.
But does it take you up at least one level to go through the old building?
Yes, it does. It does. It would make the entire Wentworth Hall accessible from this side, which currently is not.
Yeah, and so my question is that as accessible a way to get through the building as one might imagine? I mean, for instance, take the MIT building on Massachusetts Avenue. Yes, you go up some steps, although they're gentle steps, and then you're in the passageway all the way through the building. Whereas here, you go through the main building and then back down into the quadrangle space. And do you want to kind of share your ideas about that?
Sure. We've always been imagining making Wentworth Hall itself as a building to be much more accessible. So the idea would be that we come in at a flush condition off of this park, this open space into the building, and then you would either basically go through an elevated walkway that really is a sloped walkway that's within the building itself that takes you up to the Wentworth Hall elevation and then takes you all the way through and then brings you out towards the green space at the back as well. And so these are done through accessible walkways and connections. In addition, we're also creating program elements to help activate that pedestrian connection as well.
Gautam, can you change slides so Commissioner Ron can see the cut through that you have of Wentworth Hall that actually shows those ramps and pathways? I think that might be helpful.
Yeah. I'll try to do this without making you all dizzy with the streetscape. Slide source should come up. Okay, you see this here?
Yes.
Okay, so right now, this is Wentworth Hall existing.
Yes.
That is the finished elevation, and then we have our basement level as well. And then we have a set of stairs that are along here. So what we're proposing by having this pavilion is that you basically come off of that front lawn and you would have an accessible walkway. You see this dashed line, this accessible walkway that brings you down into the basement, and then an accessible walkway that will bring you out towards the quad. So we're working with the existing basement levels of the Wentworth Hall. In addition, we'll also have an accessible pathway that will take you up to this upper level that also connects to the upper level at Wentworth Hall as well, making both of these levels accessible.
Okay.
And so in some ways, it's a little similar to when you think of the addition at the Smith Center in Howard Square, where you come off the street, the courtyard, and then there is an internal amphitheater, but we basically made the existing building accessible.
Gautam, can you talk about the relationship to the existing building? Because we're seeing diagrams and we really don't get, I know a lot of your projects are going to come back for ADB review. I'm not sure that this one will. And that actually makes me a little bit worried in its relationship to the historic Wentworth Hall. You mentioned that that was an issue that came up in the last review, but I don't believe you talked about, you know, how you're thinking about this building in relationship to the historic fabric of Wentworth Hall.
And Mimi, one clarification before Gautam answers. I believe this will come back for an ADB approval
The welcome building alone, the pavilion itself? Okay,
with the renovation of the main building.
okay, that's good to know.
Yes, and so, and that's a good point to also clarify that this is not just a pavilion addition. This would also require renovations that will happen within Wentworth Hall as well. So just the addition does not make the building accessible. The discussions, there are a couple of things. One is the detail itself of how we make it accessible, and the team has spent a lot of time studying that to make sure that those elevations work. But then also from a massing standpoint, we've tried not to make the building tall because we wanted to maintain the visibility of Wentworth Hall as well as a presence. While it's not a historic building, but there's a civic presence with that building itself. And really imagining this pavilion to be something that's very, very transparent as much as possible, that really becomes more like a veil in front of this Wentworth Hall building, thereby really celebrating the architecture of that building as well. And then from a sectional standpoint, these are all existing elevations that you see over here. So we're really working with the existing basement elevation, the first floor elevations, and then really conforming that massing to really basically create two levels. There is a welcome and an entry lobby coming into the space, and then really making that accessible connection to the basement, and then coming out towards the quad, or going to the upper level and then connecting to the classrooms. And then we have this sort of like an addition that really makes these accessible connections work. But having said that, it is also going to require renovations to happen within Wentworth Hall as well to architecturally make that connection happen.
Thank you. Bill, do you have any questions about this?
Well, no, the other thing I would say that people brought up last time was the question of the paths parallel to this main path you've outlined for us, for parallel on the, I'll call it the north and south edge of Wentworth Hall. Those become major cross paths also for the campus. Is that correct?
So, if you don't mind, I'll just go to a plan view that might. So you can see this board before existing and proposed. And so to your point, there is this, like I said before, the reimagining of what was previously called as the pike into this wide pedestrian promenade that becomes a continuous connection. Now, this is a connection that does not exist today because we have the annex building over here that does not allow for that. So this will be a completely publicly accessible connection that will take you all the way out through Annunciation Road, and you could make your way through the housing to public streets towards Southwest Corridor. In addition, we also have a secondary pedestrian connection, which you can see along here, that also
yes. So my question were the two paths perpendicular to what you've just shown. The path that comes in from Ruggles right next to Williston Hall, right there, and the other is coming in from Ruggles and adjacent to Dobbs Hall. And are those the other major pathways through towards the, I'll call it the south?
Right. So one is, of course, you could go through the building, but the other accessible connections would be that there would be a pedestrian connection that you could come straight through from Ruggles, make your way through this pedestrian connection and come all the way to the core of the campus. You currently would be making that as a walk through the parking lot. Now you'll be doing that through a limited zone for just visitor parking, and then there will be a pedestrian connection that will bring you straight into the green space.
So I know a question was raised about that, and yet at the same time, I want to compliment you on the clarity of the series of quadrangles and these paths. And I recognize they're not easy to accomplish necessarily. Another important path was the one along Ruggles Street, particularly when you get on the north side of Huntington Avenue, because it's a very narrow sidewalk. And maybe you're going to deal with that. Anyway, I'm just trying to summarize what I remember hearing when I last watched this, and I really do want to turn it over to my colleagues.
So Bill, maybe I'll pick up a little bit, but by all means, you know, any other commissioners, either raise your hand or chime in. I think that the planning strategies with the quads makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know the actual names of the quads, but the residential quad, you know, created by the treehouse makes good sense. The other quad by Annunciation Road, I think makes sense. I think all of the moves are sound. I do have a little bit of pause about where the visitor center location is, but I'll suspend disbelief because I do think it makes sense. But in terms of massing, I am a little bit worried about the amount of height around the residential quad. And it's less about the building on Huntington, which you've proved that shadows won't hit Fenway and all of that good stuff. But it's really that building that's 160 in height that I'm just wondering, you know, did you consider taking some of the height and putting it on Baker Hall on that bar that's 80 feet high, I'm just worried about how the quality of that open space in the middle of that residential area with such high buildings all around it.
Sure. And this is something that we've also discussed a lot. And one of the reasons why we sort of also felt that there's a distinct character about the open spaces is to try to create different programming opportunities. We do recognize that some of the space would be shaded, but we intentionally feel like this is nice to have a shaded environment and a shaded space as well. One of the key drivers is also the program that we're accommodating in here. This is intentionally meant to replace the Edwards and Rogers building as well. While that is more of a programmatic driver, but we also want to highlight, you know, from a massing and spatial configuration standpoint, is we have the MWRA facility that is going to be expanding on the southern side. And we felt that by having a residential building or a building massing that starts to frame the space, so you're not opening up towards the MWRA, was a key driver for us. And then the second is to also help activate the pedestrian promenade with a series of active spaces as well at the ground plane too. From a height standpoint, you know, trying to get to the massing as well, so you can see this in relationship to the other taller buildings, is to really push this at the back of the tree house and the residential tower itself, and to maybe think of this to be much more of a thinner bar. We have looked at how the massing for the Baker Hall replacement may be, but we're also looking at that in relationship to the existing buildings as well. Not to say that it couldn't be accommodated, but we felt like this height, in our opinion, works in the way it's framing that space, and I think the scale of the space could accept that.
Yeah, I share the concern about that height. I've been trying to rationalize it. It's sort of an intuitive reaction to it. And I think some of it has to do with, in part, but not so much the height itself, but what happens when it just partly the contrast in the height of the residential towers and the adjoining academic buildings. You know, an issue that we've discussed quite a bit when we look at kind of full city block developments is just how the buildings relate to each other as an ensemble. And it's not clear to me. I realize this is just a plan. And I agree with my colleagues that I think your presentation is very clear. I like the rationale and the clarity in thinking about the spaces within campus. I'm just not quite convinced about how the new structures help to support the creation of a new sense of identity, a new sense of place on campus. And while I agree, it's nice to have a variety of different spaces, some of which are sunny, some of which are more enclosed. I look at this image and just feel like that space would be a canyon. And it's possible that you could convince me that there's certain characteristics of that place that you know, would like, even looking at the space that the long low residential building just to the left of the two new towers, there's a sense of place that is generated by the collection of buildings that I don't see in this one. They just they seem out of place to both your campus and to Huntington Avenue. And I think part of that, one of the things I like about Huntington Avenue, and I think there's a very important opportunity to consider here with this proposed development, is the quality of the street. That there are buildings, on the one hand, you have the MFA that steps back with a nice green plaza, Wentworth's campus, but then there are other buildings, some part of Northeastern, that really meet the street in a very civic way. That I think contribute to the sense of identity. So I just would like to better understand, or maybe it's just, I appreciated the detail with the main building and that new kind of entrance. I think I need more information about the residential towers to be convinced that they work. And then just one final point is, maybe it's my background and having gone to a school with a technical heritage, but there's something I've always really liked about the characteristics of Wentworth's campus and the character of the buildings. And as you move into this next iteration, I'm just curious how that translates, you know, how the identity evolves as you move into a different sense of scale, and with a desire maybe to present a new kind of identity to the public. Thanks. That was very long-winded. I apologize.
If I could just speak for one moment, because I think it's important that there's some really significant non-design related elements at play here, which is really, you know, an instruction and directive from the city to move students out of the neighborhoods onto campus. And then at the same, you know, to all schools, of course. And then at the same time, Wentworth is in a situation where they have several of their dorms, probably more than half of them, that are, you know, said nicely, beyond their useful life, where students will not live. And, you know, it has been that case for several years now. And so they're really at a pivot point heading into this next 10-year IMP, where they have to have these big changes and these big moves in order to be a successful institution of higher education moving forward, which, you know, I know does not override design, you know, very legitimate concerns and questions, but I did want to just at least underline that there's a lot of sort of educational programming and frankly financial underlying elements at play here.
Thank you. And I understand, and frankly, I'm not surprised. I inferred that in looking at it. So it's not to say don't do it. It's more of just, and that's part of our role, is to sort of help kind of tease out how to mediate these challenges. We face this in a lot of projects we review. So it's just an observation I made at this point, and I'm just curious. And I think, frankly, it's also an opportunity in terms of design.
Thanks, Anne Marie. Mick Young, I think you were about to chime in.
No, that's okay. You know, I just want to reiterate that I think that space that's kind of between the tree house and the two residential towers will be a difficult space that remains. And so it's a question of, you know, how many, like, there's always these kind of parameters for these quadrangles that you can, as designers, we can all look at. So we look at that central quad, you called it the heart between in the academic center. You can really feel that the addition of these massings start to reinforce the reading and the kind of strength of that central courtyard. Whereas the second courtyard beyond that, I worry about it. I think that it could become a dead space and a very windy space and be quite problematic. And just wondering, I have a second issue, which I don't fully understand in this project, but I've been walking around some areas like in the Seaport and in Alston. And really understanding the importance of the setback of the building massing from the curb line of the street. And so when we look at a project like this, where there's many new buildings being proposed, I also would like more information about what those setbacks are and what the pedestrian experience along Huntington Avenue are, so that you use the word building wall a couple of times to describe that relationship. And I think that was to define the edge, but it feels in certain views that you are creating kind of a sense of division between like Huntington Avenue and these kind of civic spaces. And I would like further study on that, because I think this is such an important project that's defining really the avenue of the arts along Huntington Avenue. And I want to make sure that there's enough generous kind of setback from the streetscape in order that these new buildings will have some sense of civic duty beyond the kind of shadow patterns and things like that. Because I think in these other neighborhoods that I've been walking around, wondering why it doesn't create a kind of pedestrian experience. And in this project, it's hard for me to tell. And so I think to really create some guidelines in this study so that future designers who come in really understand what their parameters are and what their the civic aspects of that pedestrian experience are. So I think in terms of the urban experience, understanding the portal condition and the gateways that take you from Huntington Avenue through here, I think the strength of these kind of inside-outside connections are could be very powerful. So, but to me, when I look at this plan, I see the potential for there being a real central hub, which is that academic quad, because you have reduced the green along Ruggles Street into something that I think is not as usable. It's going to be a much more narrow space and probably seen as a thoroughfare. So that third residential quadrangle, I think, is important to make great because you've got all these these students hanging out there, and even more so, Jennifer, I think is like, so we're moving the residences, and they currently, I've never been inside any of the residential buildings of Wentworth, but I would say then even more so is it our obligation to make not only the buildings amazing, but the communal space that binds these three buildings together also amazing. So, you know, I think the shadow study is going to show that it's going to be in shade all the time. And Anne Marie used the word canyon, and I think that's, for me, a negative terminology for that experience. So if there's a way of creating more porosity at the ground plane somehow, and then maybe giving some relief to the heights of these buildings so that you're not like kind of carving this very deep hole, I think would make this a much more domestic and humanistic space.
So let me
If
try
I
to-
could address, Gata, before you dive in,
Okay,
just to provide some planning department context that might speak to some of Commissioner Kim's comments. As Gata mentioned, right, this area of Huntington Avenue has what's called the Avenue of the Arts Guidelines, which was a planning study conducted by the BPDA, BRA 10 plus years ago that sought to make sure that as development happened on both sides of Huntington Avenue, that the public realm was prioritized, right? As we knew, there would be heightened density being added to this corridor. And there was an acknowledgement then, as I think there is now, about the sort of dual nature or mixed nature of the corridor, that it is both filled with important civic and institutional buildings in the city, and some of those are, you know, set back, have more, let's say, formal or neoclassical relationships with the avenue, and then some of them that you can actually see here at the intersection of Huntington and Ruggles, the darker gray, not part of Wentworth's campus, right? But there's also sort of fabric buildings and minor buildings along Huntington. So there was always, I believe, a mix of the two different types encouraged. And so as the design team got into their planning for Wentworth, we were looking at where was it appropriate to sort of help reinforce and create, street walls, and where was it appropriate to step back and create these larger, grander spaces that led to civic buildings.
No, I
Another-
appreciate that. I think it'd be great, since I haven't been part of this one-on-one, to get a better sense of the guidelines that are being proposed for this in these kind of street conditions. I'm sure that there's a lot of work. It sounds like a lot of work has gone into it. It's just hard to understand that.
And
Anne
Certainly.
Marie.
And just one more thing, one of the features built into those, the Avenue of the Arts plan was the intent for setbacks from the curb line along this stretch of Huntington, which is set at 27 feet, to make sure that the public realm is wider in the future than it had been in the past.
Mhm,
And that
yeah.
buildings themselves would be allowed a maximum typically of 80 feet in the creation of street walls along the avenue, and then step back from there. And so I
Yeah.
think that's what you're seeing in the West Tower, the taller residential building, as well as Baker Hall, the shorter one, with the proponents proposing a sort of accent tower on the corner there.
and if I
But we
can
can
just
certainly provide more information on those guidelines.
I
And-
think so. I think it's just a concern that these three new buildings will really redefine Huntington Avenue. So I just want to be very careful as we're planning for them and giving guidelines for the design team as they move forward to the next level of, what are these buildings actually doing? So the more information you can share with us of your studies, I would really appreciate it. And then I think just thinking about how you can move the language from this residential quadrangle, from the reading, and you benefit from the commissioners having fresh eyes, right? We kind of see it and we react. And that is from canyon to something else. Like, give us a convincing drawing that gives us a quality of space that goes beyond this idea that there are these three solid slivers. I mean, what's nice about the treehouse is that on the Huntington Avenue side, there's a little relief because there's that plaza with seating area and things like that. So maybe there's this notion of a front and a back to each of these buildings that give relief to that central courtyard. I know, Anne Marie, you had something you wanted to.
Well, I think this complements what you were saying. I was actually looking at slide number 5 in the draft presentation that was shared that show the kind of the existing campus and proposed. And if I understand correctly, the site where you are proposing the new residential towers, it's currently, I guess, a combination of surface parking lots and a building that will be removed.
That's correct.
So it seems like you have actually quite a nice kind of opportunity to explore a few different scenarios. I think what I would like to see is, and maybe you've done these, but would be some massing studies at, that look at different approaches. That the thing that occurs to me most immediately is it possible to redistribute the massing to bring down the height? I think that's something that Mimi suggested. So that's one thing that occurs to me. The other thing is maybe you trade, while I really appreciate the thoughtfulness in kind of the organization of the site plan and creation of public spaces, given Mimi's concern about, Mick Young's concern about, the quality of that courtyard that would be between the two towers. Is there a different strategy to the, again, distribution of building and green space? And then the other thing that occurs to me, having lived and worked in Pittsburgh for many years, where downtown is a point, and there's sort of a collision of different city grids that align with the different rivers. I think there's an opportunity, again, from a design standpoint, to think about how you design a campus, or not so much a campus, but a collection of buildings that form a new residential neighborhood for this campus that mediate between the diagonal of Huntington Avenue and, you know, the more kind of up and down sort of perpendicular grid of the campus. And I just think that that's where the nuance of design comes in. And I think there's an opportunity again, and I appreciate, I actually know somebody whose son went to Wentworth. I've heard the stories about the residential buildings. So I think, again, can you seize this as an opportunity to kind of set a new standard and to create a new community of housing on campus rather than, you know, my concern is it's going to feel like, you know, these are kind of warehouses for students. And I think it's as much about the quality of that space and the connections for the students living within those buildings as between those buildings and the other buildings on campus.
So I'd say what's really successful about the plan is that I think you have successfully created a kind of sense of an internal campus that is really readable and legible. And I think that's very tough because when you look at the existing campus, it's like a very strange shape and all the buildings don't kind of have a bias towards what it's fronting. But maybe what I'm trying to say is I think that success and that kind of central access that takes you from Ward Street to Ruggles Street is very successful, and the pedestrian access from Huntington all the way to Parker Street is also very successful. But maybe it's like at the corner of Huntington, Ruggles, and Parker, that those feel, you know, here's the challenge of the Wentworth campus is that it is a campus within the city. And so is there a way, and I liked very much the narrative that you had mentioned earlier, which was kind of opening up to the city and welcoming the city in, and to look at all the different kind of areas where your plan is trying to do that and making sure that it actually does that. Because I think there are some very successful pieces in the plan, but they tend to, for me, tend to be more internal and really defining kind of between Wentworth Hall and Beatty Hall and kind of reinforcing a sense of this axis, which I think strengthens the plan. But it's really, you have like this rectangle within this semi-triangle, or I don't even know what this shape is. And how do you start to kind of stitch back into the city in a way that's as clear as you've done with the internal campus?
And I think I want to mention that the proponent has been working with us for quite a while on this and certainly has been responsive to staff, which has shared a lot of your same concerns, and particularly how to weave this campus into the city, right? And what is its relationship to Ruggles? What is its relationship to Huntington as, you know, the interface, right,
Yeah.
of town and campus.
Yeah.
And so we were very, I think, heartened, right, with the choices to add a residential sort of complex, right, and help bring the residential to the face of Huntington, to also provide ground floor active uses in Huntington, which, as you know, in certain cases, right, in the more civic buildings, lacks those uses.
Okay.
And so we have been having that conversation. I can definitely understand it needs to continue developing, but that has certainly been part of the conversation and at the forefront of our minds.
I just have a couple of comments because I do think that the taller residential building that takes on this geometric challenge of navigating Huntington and the rest of campus actually does do it successfully. I also think that the Avenue of the Arts is really developing a series of institutional towers along Huntington Avenue. I personally don't think it's a bad thing. We have, you know, the tree house that exists. We could have this residential building. We have 500 Huntington, which we recently approved. We have the Curry building, Northeastern campus. We have Northeastern's dorm. So I do think that this is the right urban move to have height on Huntington rather than in deeper into the fabric. My only concern with this plan is really that building that's 160 and the quality of space it's going to provide. And I guess I'm just wondering, you know, could you look at them? And I respect the fact that you need these many beds. You know, I'm not trying to suggest you don't need them. I'm just wondering, is there any way to get more height onto Huntington, whether it's at the corner of, you know, the Baker building where you're doing that tower, or along that stretch in order to try to get light and air into that quad? Because it doesn't look like the MWRA buildings that are proposed, if they're drawn correctly in your massing, are very tall. Those look like they're pretty low buildings.
Yeah. And they're probably deeper underground than they're above ground. But this is also the
So
expansion.
Mimi, one comment, sorry, Gautam, that I can just interject with, in terms of the ability sort of to have this type of flexibility moving forward and to give this commission and the BPDA and their staff, obviously future opportunity to resolve the right massing in the right place, is given that we are only in 80D right now, one thing that we're intentionally trying to do is ensure that our zoning envelope maximums provide not only the number of beds we need, but actually also flexibility to shift around a little bit, not a huge amount, but a little bit, you know, a couple floors at a time here and there, you know, as those projects are truly designed. And we continue to receive this feedback and guidance from your commission and BPDA staff, and the community. And so we have had our eye on that long stretch of Baker Hall to ensure that it has the capacity to absorb an extra level and maybe even an extra 2 levels if we need to ultimately shave off height from one of the other dorms. And so I did just want to state that that's something that we've been looking at as well, working with Seth and his staff at the BPDA to make sure that these are truly maximums with capacity to shrink, as obviously as opposed to grow. But that is something that we have been working on and are ensuring that we're able to do that as we move forward, understanding and hearing your comments.
Well, I think that's reassuring to me. I'm not sure that's reassuring to the rest of the commission. So you know, I'm just wondering, Bill, if you have any thoughts, because you've been in more of these meetings regarding, you know, the massing, the shifting of height, precedent we're setting along the Avenue of the Arts.
I've only been in maybe one more meeting than you all have, but I think the comments everyone has just heard over the last 15 minutes are all incredibly helpful. And you know, my question to the petitioners, are these things that they're willing to look at or not, I guess. I mean, what type of time frame are we in?
Seth, is there any guidance on a time frame? I mean, I think the interest in us having more commissioners review this before going to the monthly meeting is that we want you to succeed during the monthly meeting. And so I know there's some fresh comments and some fresh eyes. And I'm just thinking, you know, do we need to, you know, think about another subcommittee, or do we give them enough guidance in this meeting to come back? I mean, to come to the monthly meeting. And Anne Marie and, you know, McYoung Kim, I look to you guys to weigh in on that.
So,
I'm sorry to interject again, but respectfully, I just want to note that in the last meeting, we were asked to, speak about massing, knowing that that would be the third subcommittee meeting at, heading into year 2 of this institutional master plan that is ADD only, with every single project coming back for considerable further review at ADB. And so frustrating, I don't think is the word that we would land on if we're not able to proceed forward, but I will leave it at that.
And I will say,
I understand your frustration. I totally get it. This is my second time seeing this, so I apologize. I know that you've been coming forward to the BCDC many times, but I personally think there are enough larger issues with such a significant project that I think it warrants another subcommittee review that with some of the other of our architectural colleagues, but I can be overridden if I feel like it gets very messy when we bring something to full committee when there's some big issues about height and things like that in this plan that you're hearing across the board. And Mimi said this earlier, we've found that you rush into that and then what happens is it could actually come back to subcommittee again because there are not enough voices who feel that this is moving forward. But
Where do we get the oxygen thing?
I don't know.
What oxygen?
I would agree.
Measure.
I would agree with this, that we, this is a master plan that will guide development for some time. It is a major project of scale and deserves the time and attention. And I think Mimi said it quite well, that one of our goals is to, by the time when you come to the full commission, to be supportive of your project. And I think there are several concerns that have been raised in this meeting, and I apologize, this is just my first time seeing it, so it is new to me, and I appreciate the amount of time and effort that goes into preparing for these meetings, but I agree with my colleague. I think it's best to come back to subcommittee.
I'll make one last plea that, we're not really sure how we can have any ability to foresee what's going to happen, or any ability to know that there will be consistency or stability within the review process. Again, 2 years in with ADD only, we're not getting consistent commissioner review. This feels very, frankly, unfair to the proponent, inconsistent with the zoning code, and not to mention, statements made to us throughout this process from other commissioners. So I understand, I hear where this is going, but as the land use attorney for the proponent, I think this is very unfair and arguably inconsistent with the zoning ordinance and the directive for BCDC in projects like this. So I understand it will go where it will go, but I am very dismayed, as will be the entire institution, that this is where this has gone, given all of the effort, that it feels like the rug keeps on being pulled out from under us and the goalposts are continuously moving outside of our control.
Jen, can I interrupt, say thank you very much for your comments, and we should certainly discuss this, and we can set up a time tomorrow to do so, but I'd like the commission to continue to feel confident in being able to express their roles and opinions in this matter. So we will certainly be talking. I do want to address one point that you made, which is the consistency of review. While we strive for that, we often encourage other commissioners to come into the review process because folks will be seeing it towards the end. So it does help provide a diversity of comments during the process to help ensure that comments at the end of the process are less of or not a surprise. Thank
Seth,
you.
I appreciate that. I mean, we are a commission of 12, and every one of the commissioners' voices actually matter. Not only, at a monthly meeting, but throughout the design process. And by design, the review is not always, the reviewers are not always consistent, because a project like yours is really important and impactful for the city. And, I think there's a lot of expertise on this commission that we rely on to weigh in. But maybe what we should do, Seth, next is really listen to see if there's any public comments.
Yes. Thank you.
And Seth, I would love if we could spend 2 minutes at some point to just summarize what are, like, the comments were far-ranging from information that's already been provided that we did not go through today, but we've gone through in the past, to new comments. It'll be good as a designer to just summarize what are the key questions because the comments were just so far-ranging. It'll be helpful for me.
Yeah, Gautam, I was actually thinking about that. I do want to give you clear direction. And so let's see if there's public comments, and, Seth, between you and me, we can give it a try to define what we're asking specifically for them to study.
Certainly. So at this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and I will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function, and dial 6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information. Please keep comments to 2 minutes. Do we have any public testimony? Okay, Commissioner Love, not seeing any raised hands. That concludes our public testimony. And I'll turn it back to the commissioners. Certainly, we can.
What I can offer is if there is material that's been presented to BCDC during the process that I've missed personally, I'm happy to have that information just emailed to me so that I can review it. So that the big issue, Mimi, that seems to be at hand is the massing, right? And today was supposed to be about massing, right?
Correct.
About one of the buildings or maybe 2 of the buildings. And so it could be a quick turnaround. Usually what we do is, if you've studied this and multiple options, maybe you can bring those options to the table and we can see, but there's been clear direction from my colleagues on the building massing, and that we can say if there's other information about the urban design / landscape piece that's already been presented and approved by my fellow commissioners in the past, I'm happy to just receive those and review them without either approval or not approval. But when this comes to full commission, then I can, accept some of the questions that I had without an additional meeting for it. And today was supposed to be about massing, so
yeah, I think that's right. And I think, in my opinion, and I want others to weigh in if I'm not capturing everything you're concerned about, I really feel it's about Huntington Avenue. It's about really understanding the massing from eye-level perspectives, really, from the west looking, down Huntington Avenue, and then from, I think I'm getting my directions right. Yep, and from the east looking down as well. With any new development, the 500 Huntington, I think, would be appropriate to include in some of those massing views. But I think it's really, really focused around that residential quad. I even think a shadow study on that quad. I think we're all convinced we're not going to get an ounce of daylight into that quad. And so does that help you think about the massing around that quad? But I do think the area is tight. I feel like the entering pavilion and the buildings that remove the annex, I'm not worried about those, but others weigh in. So I really think it's focused around the residential quad and Huntington Avenue, and alternative massing studies to create a better open space around those areas.
Can I just unpack Huntington Avenue a little further?
Sure.
So we've studied the Avenue of the Arts guidelines and what this could be part of the email package that we share with Mick Young and Tim and team. Is we studied the overall guidelines, and there was a whole presentation that was done around the streetscape improvements. So when you look at that existing condition plan, it's a very varying condition, right? And buildings are really pressed up against the roadway, like Edwards, Rogers, Baker Hall, all of these. And so the team has intentionally, their entire edge is to create a consistent streetscape and exceed the Avenue of the Art guidelines in creating an active ground plane with
Yeah.
active uses. So all of that work's been done. and
It
we can,
sounds great. It sounds
and we
great.
can package
So
and send that to you.
if that's easier for you guys, I'm just trying to offer ways to facilitate this so that I understand. I think in defense of BCDC, we're the last in line of a long process I'm sure you guys have gone through. And as Seth said, part of our obligation is to just make sure that this big project is a positive contribution to this very important part of the city. So, you know, our job is to ask questions, and if you can share that information. I don't know, Seth, if it's just sent to me or if other commissioners want to see that again. It might be worth just sending it to everyone so it doesn't, those questions don't come up again at full commission if somebody hasn't seen the project or didn't see it in the early rounds.
I'm sure the proponent will be more than happy to
Yeah,
put together
absolutely.
a package of information.
Don't give me
do
a
need to say,
$300-page document, you know, keep it streamlined, and I would appreciate that greatly.
I do need to just caution that, just a reminder, right, that deliberations need to happen as part of the public meeting process, and any materials, you know, submitted will also be submitted into the public record.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think with that, you know, we are running late. Gautam, I'm sure you'll have communications with Seth. But I think we've given you clear guidance, and I just want to make sure that Anne Marie or Bill, Ron, you don't want to add anything else to review during the next subcommittee. Okay.
So in order to streamline this, I think it would be important, Seth, as you're planning the next, however quickly this proponent team can come forward, that they're, that you probably don't need folks like me in the room, but you probably need other architects to look at the massing, so that it's a clear discussion.
Certainly. Thank you for that. So hearing no additional comments at this time, and in lieu of a formal vote, commissioners, it is my understanding that the proposed project is recommended for additional review at Design Review Subcommittee.
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to the Wentworth team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to our next project, and I believe we are elevating members from that team to be able to present in a minute. The next project is the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, ADD, a joint proposed 10-year institutional master plan for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, seeking Article ADD IMP entitlement, contemplates the development of approximately 495,000 square feet of hospital uses, 5,000 square feet of ground floor retail uses, and 250 off-street parking spaces in a single building on an approximately 1 acre site located at 1 Jocelyn Place. This will be the first presentation of the proposed project to the Design Subcommittee, following introduction at the August 6th monthly meeting. Commissioners Easley, Evans, Gilly-Smith, Haseen, Love, Kotaridis, Morris, Ron, and Sykes were present at the meeting and recommended the project for additional review in Design Committee. Commissioners Haseen, Love, and Ron, as well as Gilly-Smith, join us this evening and should be prepared to deliver remarks at the start of deliberation. Commissioners Kim and Solano have recused themselves from deliberations. It is my understanding that there are no other commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves. A reminder to proponent teams that presentations will be limited to 15 minutes. I will give you a halftime warning, and with that, I invite the proponent team to present whenever ready.
Thank you very much, Seth. Good evening to
Can
the
I just
commissioner.
interrupt
Oh.
for 1 minute?
Sure, Mimi. Sorry.
Do we need to notify David Hassine to join? I don't see him on, and I know Shauna has joined us.
I reached out to
Okay.
David. We were expecting him, but he may not
Okay,
have been
that's
able to
okay.
join for one reason or another.
All right. Sorry, Michael. Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's fine. Thank you very much to the commissioners for your time this evening, and thank you to the larger body for the comments that we received at our presentation to the BCDC last month. I'm joined this evening by my colleague Kevin Sullivan, as well as Wendy Gettleman, the Vice President for Facilities Management and Real Estate for Dana-Farber. Let me share my screen right now and orient you to what we plan to present to you tonight for materials. What we heard from you and the fellow commissioners were some questions about the details of the master plans for the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, as well as Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Two very different master plans from the one we just heard you discuss. So this evening, what we've done is collected some information to tell you a little bit about the mission, the organizational principles, the functionality and the constraints that overlay the planning that went into these two master plans, and Wendy will tell you about that. And then I'll give you an overview for the urban design framework that underpins these two master plans, whether that's the campus identity and spatial hierarchy, or the landscape and pedestrian realm, the traffic and transportation aspects, or the context for the proposed project or future projects within the framework. So to orient you again to the master plans here, north is up, and to the right, we see in bright pink the outlines of the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center divided into the east and west campuses, as well as the very dense and compact Dana-Farber Cancer Institute at their core. Now I'd like to introduce Wendy, who will tell us a little bit about how these campuses are organized. Wendy?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone. Good evening. So this slide is a diagram that represents the IMP areas for both BI.
I think we lost Wendy.
DMC and Dana-Farber. Did you hear me?
You went out for a minute, but you're back.
Sorry, Mimi. Thank you. Looks like I'm okay so far, so thank you. Let me know if I go out again. BIDMC is a large academic medical center which includes a busy emergency room with a level 1 trauma center. Dana-Farber is a designated comprehensive cancer hospital, one of only 11 in the country. We are collaborating to create on the BIDMC campus something that does not exist in New England, a cancer-only hospital which will be owned and operated by Dana-Farber and utilizes the existing resources of both Dana-Farber and BIDMC. Next slide, please. The campuses of Dana-Farber and BIDMC support these critical missions through a network of uses, typical of an academic medical center. The BIDMC campus contains a mix of inpatient, outpatient, and research functions, as you can see in this diagram. And since the merger of the New England Deaconess and Beth Israel hospitals in 1996, inpatient functions dominate the West Campus. Dana-Farber's compact campus, you can see below, is also a mix of outpatient and research functions. Both campuses have additional research facilities in adjacent buildings and other off-campus locations. Next slide. The proposed project site suits this collaboration by optimizing shared resources from both campuses at the intersection of this future cancer hospital. The planned relocation of the Joslin Clinic's operations into new space on the BIDMC East Campus creates the perfect location for a new hospital dedicated to cancer care. The structure and planning of both campuses fortuitously prepares a framework to support this new use. Next slide, please. A hospital dedicated to cancer care requires many support services and departments. Several of these exist today. For example, the emergency department and the operating rooms are strategically located on the BIDMC West Campus. As you can, imaging services and numerous patient and family services. Can you hear me okay? Great. Those imaging services and numerous patient and family services are located on the Dana-Farber campus. Through strategic connections, the future cancer hospital can efficiently utilize these assets. A network of third-floor connections links these functions on each campus today for patients and their families. An intuitive handshake across the site can provide the necessary link from these services to the future cancer hospital. I'd now like to turn the presentation back over to Michael Hinchcliffe of Payette. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Wendy. So hopefully that provides you with some context about how every square inch of both of these campuses is utilized to provide cutting-edge research and the highest level of patient care, both inpatient and outpatient. Further complicating and influencing the position of the proposed project between these two, some questions were raised about the underground linkages or the proposed linkages for the new project. Jocelyn Park is underlaid by a dense series of utility networks. So the Maytep District Utility Plant, which is alongside the Dana-Farber campus, provides district utilities not only to most of Longwood, but also to the Beth Israel West campus. Those utilities pass through a shallow tunnel under the park, along with other major utilities, as well as a dense web of infrastructure that supports the city underneath Brookline Avenue. So the location has been specifically designed with these connections in the north-south handshake that Wendy talked about to try and overcome these challenges that exist in the existing buildings, but is well thought out to provide the necessary connections that the project needs and anticipated. But to step back and look at the urban infrastructure and what really underlies the planning principles from an urban design perspective for these two campuses, they're really about supporting the pedestrian realm and the aspects of our city and movement through the city that are so important to how buildings contribute to that framework. Moreover, it's the respect for Brookline Avenue and Longwood Avenue and the street faces that are the primary organizing principle. Secondary to that, though, is how the two campuses utilize their secondary and tertiary roads to take and move their very key important activities for their staff, patients, and visitors to those thoroughfares. When we look at these, the couplet of around Jocelyn Park, of Deaconess Road and Jocelyn Place, form a new heart that connects to the spine of the Dana-Farber campus along Jimmy Fund Way. The major drop-offs and entries that organize themselves around this tight thoroughfare are part of the core of these two projects. The East Campus on Beth Israel is located along is structured along similar principles, where the Binney Street extension provides the major vehicular drop-off for the East Campus, as well as a well-framed urban portal for the main entry. Secondarily, service areas such as loading docks and service functions are moved away from these, supporting a clear reading of the district, but also supporting the very, I think, important measures that both campuses put in to managing traffic and circulation throughout the district. When we look at the framework, though, as I said earlier, almost every square inch of these campuses is built, leaving precious little space for landscape and the pedestrian realm. But that space is treated very carefully to try and bring a heart and sense of place to Longwood. The building,
Michael, you're about halfway through.
Thanks very much, Seth. So the building faces support and help define the main entries and identity for the building, but they also frame key urban infrastructure like Jocelyn Park or the street wall of Brookline Avenue. It's these front doors that are supported by the interior planning and usage that create a really vibrant framework in Longwood. The landscape that those building street faces define is very key. The Shapiro Plaza that exists along Brookline Avenue in front of the main entry to those outpatient activities at the Beth Israel East Campus is one of the most vital places in Longwood today, the scene of many lunchtime activities and games and placemaking activities. The plans support a linkage of Shapiro Plaza along Brookline Avenue with streetscape improvements to Jocelyn Park, which really promises to be the heart and new welcoming front door to both Dana-Farber and the West Campus. That does continue along to the PMC, or the Pan Mass Challenge Plaza, creating a vibrant urban thoroughfare. That's counterbalanced, though, by the soft edge of the Riverway. with several projects able to be envisioned, which will help stitch together the gaps that exist in the canopy and the urban landscape that makes that transitionary edge from the dense longwood to the very, very precious resource of the Emerald Necklace. To talk a little bit more about Joslyn Park, some questions came up about its role in the two campuses and the new project. We performed a use study that was very enlightening for how Joslyn Park works today. As a dense urban park, there is much opportunity for improvement here. We found that most people are using it solo to transit through the park, or unfortunately for smoking. We feel that most of these activities can be improved with a new vision for Joslyn Park. So with the main project, the Cancer Hospital that Wendy described on one face, the Rosenberg building on the lower face, which is the front door to most ambulatory admissions to the emergency department for Beth Israel, as well as the potential new face at this edge of Deaconess. The Joslyn Park really does present a rich opportunity through the master plan and the project development to enhance and support the urban framework of the district. Both plans do also include significant mitigation for traffic and pedestrian and bicycle movements within their infrastructure. So apart from the areas addressed by the new project that will be a component of the Article 80B process, significant mitigations are also proposed for key thoroughfares and intersections around the site, whether that's along the urban corridor of Brookline Avenue from Longwood Avenue past Jimmy Fund Way and the projects, to pedestrian improvements at Pilgrim Road, that Clee Secondary Street, also improvements at the Riverway at Netherlands to help ease and ameliorate congested traffic situations in the district. When we look, however, though, at the massing of both campuses and their age of their infrastructure, both Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and Jamie Farber and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute have very few chances to improve their campuses. Most is focused around 10 to 15-year major projects that show the incremental growth. For Dana-Farber, that was the Yawkey building, which was completed several years ago along Brookline Avenue. And for Beth Israel, that was the recent Klarman building, which was just opened along Francis Street. As Wendy said, the collaboration between the two institutions and this new major project at their intersection is a great opportunity for not only a site, but also for the improvement of space for the aging infrastructure of the Joslyn Diabetes Center, which occupies the current site and will be relocated to other parts of the campus. I'll note here on this slide that future growth is foreseen with this project at the Deaconess and the Libby buildings on the campus. To close, the zoning envelope that is described in the master plans is very much in keeping with the character of Brookline Avenue as it's evolving through the guidance of the BCDC and the BPDA over time. We look forward in the Article 80B process to looking at the rich streetscape that is this block of Brookline Avenue with varied street frontages and exposures. In closing, though, I did want to respond to a specific question at the last meeting, which is why this project and why this big? Are there any opportunities to adjust the mass? As we said previously, we very carefully looked at the shadow impacts of the project to guarantee that they do not have more than 1 hour of impacts on the park or the riverway. But the building mass is specifically designed to support the 300-bed patient need that Dana-Farber and Beth Israel identified for this project. Incremental increases of 1 or 2 floors, either up or down, have very little impact on the shadows or the environment of both key public spaces for the city. So hopefully this has provided some feedback to the questions about the structure and mission and organization of the campuses. Wendy, Kevin, and I would be more than happy to look at and discuss any of these in more detail with you. So thank you for your time this evening in advance.
And before the commissioners jump in, I just want to provide some guidance on a subject that had been touched on at the introduction, and I know has raised some questions. And so as part of this institutional master plan, BIDMC and Dana-Farber are not seeking approval of the connections. The BPDA has decided that those connections, if any, demand very high levels of scrutiny, and the appropriate time to provide that scrutiny, respond to specific designs, look at alternatives is in the 80B process. So while they're not, it's clear that they are pursuing those connections. We did want to say that those are connections and opportunities that we're going to be looking at mostly in 80B.
Thanks, Seth. Commissioners?
I'll start if no one else will. So Michael, thank you very much for the brief and very, very clear presentation. So I'm just thinking about the landscape and the perfect. This diagram is extremely helpful in terms of the aspirational diagram for the project. And this is what I'm still struggling with the master plan process, in that I agree with the aspirations, but I don't know any of the specifics. I don't know any of the guidelines. I don't know how that yellow line is going to carry over from one building to another. As we discussed in the last meeting, the streetscapes in some places are so tight. And again, I don't know if that's within the bounds of this review, but I very much do want to understand what are the specifics of how this public realm can be improved. And I can talk about it, so that's for most of it. But when we're focusing on Jocelyn Park itself, I think even at the master plan level, I think the idea of having, a more robust and energetic approach to that park is significant. But one thing I want to talk about, and I think it was alluded to at the last meeting, is the traffic and the character and the space that park takes up. So right now, when I am not as familiar with the area as you are, but looking at the frontage in front of Jocelyn Park, when I'm looking at it on Google Earth, there's one-way traffic and parking on both sides. I don't understand the importance of retaining that parking. I would like to understand if that can be given to the public realm as well. Potentially on the other side seems to be more about traffic movement, but I think the there of the park isn't quite there yet, even at the master planning level. I think it's a beautiful diagram about all of them, but it's fairly non-specific, I think.
Well, Shauna, let me attempt to inform you a little bit more about the context that has informed this. So this Jocelyn Park is a city park. So I'm sure Seth will strengthen here that all redesign activities for that park would be undertaken with the Parks Department in terms of its impact and zoning and eventual management. Beth Israel does maintain that park for the city. The master plan documents that talk in more detail about the traffic and transportation. We are very much interested in removing the parking or working with the traffic department to remove the parking that exists on both sides of that street to make way for through traffic, very critical through traffic for the emergency department entry for Rosenberg that's on the south side of the park, but also setting aside the north side of Jocelyn Place for pedestrian drop-off and accessible drop-off for the new cancer hospital. As we said earlier, valet activities for parking will be inside the building, so we'll be able to maintain this as a thoroughfare with minimal stopping there to really hopefully move cars out of the picture and increase the visual connections across the park between the two building entries.
So, Michael, you're talking about removing 2 lanes of parking and
Correct.
having one for drop-off only, so you'll have 2 travel lanes?
That is correct. So there'll be Jocelyn Park will be 2 travel lanes to the left of the page with one drop-off and accessible drop-off north. Deaconess Road is 2 travel lanes to the right of the page with one accessible drop-off lane at the bottom. Right now, the parking that you see on Jocelyn Park is illegal parking that I think Wendy and Jared from both institutions hope to work with the city University and the Longwood Collective to try and better steward traffic movement through the area.
Michael, if I might add one thing, just the green space that's along the sidewalk in front of the future cancer hospital as well is quite a bit. It's of a wider dimension than, for example, the Klarman building just down the street. And so this site is interesting in that it's a thinner site than that building. So we're actually surrendering quite a bit of the ground floor to widen that aperture along the street. So I just wanted to put it in the context that there's more space here because of the activity, the frontage on the park, than the recent project down the street.
Thanks, Kevin.
Maybe I'll pick it up and see if we can go to a larger plan. I mean, I think that's actually a really interesting thought, Shauna. And, I think it definitely, would be interesting to further study. Is there a way to make the road in front of Rosenberg wider, still have a drop off with a landscape that you travel to get to the cancer center? I think that's an interesting proposition. But in addition, actually, if you go to the drawing that has the buildings color coded by when they were built.
Sure.
As a master plan, it's really hard for us to only focus on one building on one site when there is so many, there is this ripe opportunity. And that opportunity is thinking about what happens at the access or the end of Jocelyn Road. When you have the Libby building, it's a pre-1950 building. It's right in, direct connection with connecting to the Emerald Necklace. And as a master plan idea, I'm just curious if there's any way to think about the future of that site, unrelated to the one building you're talking about, to create a stronger connection that increases the open space. You talked about how it's so limited and the yellow doesn't touch the green, and it's just so there. And that link just wants to be there. And I know that it's a different focus of the master plan, but as a master plan, it is worth talking about.
So I will maybe follow Seth's admonishment that the connectors are foreseen as a part of the Article 80B process, but we very much see that the connector that will provide a new fourth wall for Jocelyn Park along that face is a very important part of the next stage of development and review. I don't know, Wendy, if you want to answer for Jared's part in terms of the long-term development of the Libby and Deaconess buildings, but Beth Israel does foresee the eventual replacement of both of those buildings, but that is in the very long term, past the 15-year horizon that this significant project for the new cancer hospital presents to both institutions. That I think Beth Israel is thinking long term about those buildings, but it is in the far future, and we're hoping and I'm confident that the plan and the connectors do not preclude anything in that future planning or development.
I just want to make sure we're talking.
Michael, you said it. Yep. So you're talking about. Can you hear me? You're talking about the Libby building, right, Mimi? The red building at the edge there. So I do know from having numerous conversations with Jared and the BIDMC team that it is absolutely in their master planning thoughts. It's just not in. It's in beyond the terms of this IMP timeframe.
So just to put a little bit of context, if it is in their master planning thoughts, and even if it's not in the IMP that we're reviewing right now, does it warrant a little bit of study so we know how to think about Jocelyn Place in the future of that being a possibility to connect to the Riverway? That's my larger question, through open space rather than
Mimi, I don't want to over answer the question without study, but I think that that the plans that may be foreseen there is that the density of use for expansion of inpatient care on the West Campus may preclude any kind of exterior landscape connection between Joslyn Park and the Riverway, but I don't think at this level that would preclude any kind of future interior connection across that important access to link the two landscape assets. And Kevin, you may have more.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, you were
Yeah.
very clear about that. You know, the building that would be planned for the future would be a robust inpatient tower. Like any of these buildings here, it's always a challenge to even fit them on the site, and that site is clearly one that has those obstacles. So I do think, you know, when that comes to be, I think, Michael, the suggestion you talked about would be something that would be widely considered, I think. And the planning for any connection would absolutely be thinking about the optimization of floor-to-floor heights and how they would work with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think I'm just to be clear, and I see that Bill Ron has his hand up. When I'm talking about connections, I'm really talking about connections of open space.
Yes.
I'm trying to suspend and not talk about the physical connections to get from one building to another until the appropriate time,
Right.
as Seth has called out. But anyway, Bill, you're on mute.
Michael and Wendy and Kevin, thank you for the clarity of some of what we started talking about today. At the meeting 2 weeks ago, Mimi urged you all to share with us information about other buildings, their height, age, uses as part of the BI Dana-Farber complex, and I think would be really helpful if you simply walked through, whether it's this drawing or the yes, this drawing, if you just gave us a one-sentence description of each of these others, because I think all of us 2 weeks ago were concerned about the open space implications for this. And I think we also recognize that, at least, I mean, your team are the experts. There's no question about it, we are not. But the sense of open space as giving some breathing room to intense urban hospitals is a real issue. And as you described each of those buildings in one sentence, if you wanted to say which ones might be expendable as you start thinking of open space, that might be a nice lesson for us, a 10-minute lesson. But I don't know if that makes sense to you, Michael.
Sure. Wendy, do you want to describe the Dana-Farber campus and its space constraints?
Well, I'm talking about the whole.
Yeah, we'll start with both, Bill.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So if we start with Dana-Farber, I think that one of the really important things is to start with the Yawkey Center, because the Yawkey Center does a couple of things. We were able to set that site back by more than 30 feet to create a PMC Plaza, which has, a really nice introduction to the public realm for not only landscaping, but also just enlivening the urban realm there. And then we also have the interior healing garden, which is viewable from Brookline Avenue, both directions at all times of day, and really does link beautifully the sense of hope with the plantings. And we do intend to do something similar to make that connection in the future cancer hospital. Beyond that, we have Jimmy Fund Way is what I would consider the spine of the Dana-Farber campus. and there are it's quite tight. So that really, when we had the opportunity to build something new and different with the Yawkey Center, we tried to take advantage of both what we could on the ground level, but also interior wise. The other building.
Oh, Wendy,
we have the Smith building, which is a research building, and we also have. My apologies. Am I cutting in and out?
You cut a little bit.
I'm gonna turn off my video and see if that helps. And I think the other buildings, and then the Jimmy Fund building is the orange building in the back there, which is our oldest building. But I think as we're looking to the future, to look at ways that we can incorporate both of and take the lead based on what we did for the Yawkey Center going forward. With that, Michael, do you want to take a shot at walking through the BIDMC campus?
Absolutely, yeah. Kevin and I can walk you through both of those. So if we, it's really fortuitous with this view if we have, in comparison, the Brigham and Women's campus behind us, where we see really the only one of the few spaces of open spaces on the Brigham campus is the new Brigham Green, with the rest of its footprint really taken up completely by healthcare functions. The Beth Israel West campus is similar, with very few opportunities for open space and really no expendable buildings for opening up the campus. So the Rosenberg building in yellow is the site of the existing emergency department, surgeries, imaging, and inpatient functions. The adjacent Klarman building expanded that surgical platform with new surgeries, as well as new inpatient buildings. The Lowry building and parking garage at the periphery of the campus currently serve parking and outpatient facilities. The conglomeration of buildings that runs from the Libby building, which serves utility and campus functions, the Deaconess building, which is the original hospital building from the 1930s, which has now been renovated to provide support services, links through the Farr building, which is a secondary and specialty tower that provides inpatient beds for the West Campus, along through additional buildings along Pilgrim Road, which support inpatient activities and specialty diagnostic and services. So really the complete component of the West Campus with the linked buildings is really serving with every square inch the existing outpatient functions. I'll note though, Bill, that it was the Joslin Diabetes Center at the core of this campus, which was identified as being that first expendable building. With the affiliation of the two institutions, the opportunity to move the Joslin clinical and research functions out of their aging infrastructure into more up-to-date and modern facilities on the East Campus provided this opportunity, this incremental room for growth for the campus to provide the opportunity for the new hospital between the two institutions. So in many ways, Joslin Park, though a public park, really serves as the green space for these two campuses, with that maintenance and stewardship of Beth Israel for that space. So on the East Campus, I think the only building that West Campus, the only building that I neglected is the Pilgrim Road Garage, which serves patients and outpatients, which is located here.
And Michael, just to add, the garage, the Libby building and the Deaconess building, those are sort of the most I'd say at risk in terms of they're older structures. The other structures have too much patient activity in them to really imagine doing anything. So you'd just imagine a footprint in 15 years or more that's a very similar scale to the one we're thinking about, or a very similar scale to the Klarman building. And it just gives you a point of reference to what that may mean. But this something, it's way off in their projections. It's
I'm sure,
not something that's really on any timeline that would be certainly in my lifetime, I think.
I'm sure. I'm sure that that Wendy, here you may be able to strengthen the financial pressures and obligations of the plan, but within the framework of the 10-year structure of this master plan, what we've outlined is the achievable and necessary growth for both campuses.
Michael, yeah, I don't have much to add beyond that, except to say that, you know, this is the future cancer hospital is the one project that we can anticipate that will really provide not so many benefits to the not only to this neighborhood, but also to the city and to all of New England. And in doing so, really being able to be thoughtful about making sure that our front door, which is adjacent to Joslin Park, we optimize that opportunity, and also optimize the landscape opportunities around the building, both adjacent to Joslin Park, but also along Brookline Avenue.
So I still am struggling how we're really optimizing I appreciate the sentiment, and they're obviously extremely important buildings, no question about it. And I think that's why we're all sort of struggling with how do we give the real estate to the open space. I think that this district could really significantly benefit from. Even within the, you know, the project that we're talking about, I appreciate the widened sidewalks. I would still like to understand how much you can push it, how narrow you can make the roads, because I do feel that the same sort of peace and tranquility of the healing gardens inside, that level of greenness of nature should also be available to those that aren't going inside. And I'm not convinced yet that this master plan is optimizing those opportunities. Following up from, you know, asking a difficult question, following up from Bill Ron's question of where would you see in this campus open space the opportunities for significant open space?
So Shauna, let me use this drawing on the screen right now to talk about two spaces that are key to the life of Longwood that exist today, that have been built by both Dana-Farber and by Beth Israel over the past 10 to 15 years, that are really those contributing open spaces that I think you're alluding to, that are already there today as gifts from both institutions to the district. The first that I'll note is Shapiro Plaza. So with the setbacks of the East Campus along Brookline Avenue, that the network of open spaces from Shapiro Plaza across to Short Street are really part of a vibrant network of placemaking that Beth Israel sees as one of the key components of their campus, and also to the district. On the south side at Binney Street, there's a corresponding
Michael,
plaza that's internal. Yeah.
Sorry, just sticking on the first one for a second.
Yeah.
Isn't there a lot of vehicular access, not on the Shapiro Plaza, but on the two adjacent parcels?
So there are momentary interruptions of that green space with vehicular access at regular intervals there, but there is, I think, a relatively dense network of plantings that provide a continuity of the boulevard aspect. The other one that I don't, the next space that I didn't label here is the Pan Mass Challenge, or the PMC Plaza that Wendy spoke of. So in the development of the Yawkey building, the ability with that outpatient center with much more flexibility in its massing and floor plan to pull the building back slightly to create the Pan Mass Challenge as another moment of relief and a public accessible open space there really is, I think, provided the two poles or anchors that this new project and master plan allow to be set up the ends of the sequence that Joslin Park and the two new buildings are allowed to, I think, fully connect. Where the campuses do offer reprieve to the district, particularly for the Beth Israel campus, is along the edge to the Riverway, where the buildings do step back. They do reduce in massing to provide this really central gentle, soft, and passive edge toward the riverway. But within the district itself, the programmatic constraints and the key critical functions to our city that both hospitals are providing are really working within the framework of the urban walls to set up what they can in terms of these spaces that they already offer, the opportunity for Joslyn Place, but then within the new cancer hospital that I think we discussed earlier, but would be a part of ADB, generous setbacks at the street level to widen and augment the pedestrian realm that would be a part of the Article ADB discussion for that mass and building.
Test it again later.
Okay.
I mean, I think, you know, Shapiro Plaza is there, the PMC Plaza is there, all your tight urban conditions are there. The only relief we have is Joslyn Park, and I guess it just doesn't feel super satisfying. I think this is why we're asking you, like, how further can we expand? And so I think we want you to think about that. But maybe what would be helpful is to really focus on Joslyn Park and come back with different iterations of how you're narrowing, you know, the amount of pavement, how you're reorganizing circulation to continue to work for both the Rosenberg and your new hospital, but how are we just making that a better quality urban space? I think it's a really, really important piece. I'm struggling with this project because we really can't talk about connections. There's no more opportunity for open space. And so I'm feeling like the commentary is fairly limited to now Joslyn Park. And we should certainly talk about the ground floor of your proposed building. But I'm just being honest. I'm feeling like, okay, we're hemmed in here. And so if we're going to get hemmed in, we really, really need to dig into Joslyn Place and this park design. So, so maybe that's something that we need to think about. I do know that you were asked a question by one of the other commissioners, I think Commissioner Syke, about extending the public either amenity or lobby in that gray space that's south of the loading dock. I don't know that anything has really changed from the last time.
It has not, Mimi, and that's really a part of the development of the project itself and ADB from a zoning standpoint that we pledge to activate the streetscape and the urban realm with that. But that level of detail is really in the specific project development, separate from the zoning and master plan itself, I think.
If I might add, also, if you went back to that slide, Michael,
sure.
We didn't also have the opportunity to share some of the really amazing ideas that we have along where it says lobby, and how that area, both on the exterior of the building and the interior of the building, will really work to enhance the whole feeling of being in that space, in that main entry view from Joslyn Park and as you turn from Brookline Avenue. So as we get to the next series with large project review, we look forward to sharing that and have heard loud and clear the ideas of trying to make sure that we take full advantage of the frontage along Joslyn Place.
I guess, Wendy, I just want to point out with this drawing on the screen, I think I want to make it clear to everyone, lest there be any confusion about what the extents of the private property is versus what the public property is for both institutions. Deaconess Road is a city street with public sidewalks on both sides, as is Joslyn Place as a city street with public parks on both sides. So I want to acknowledge the limitations of the plan's ability to address the public way in those zones.
I have a question, but I think I also see that Kevin, you had a question, or Anne Marie. Well, let me follow.
Your hand was up first, Bill, so go ahead.
Let me follow up on Mimi's question. And if we could just go back to this drawing, this perfect drawing. My issue, besides the details of what represents Shapiro Plaza along the face of the building, is with traffic moving at 40 miles an hour next to the sidewalk. You know, I, for one, have never found Shapiro Plaza to be a particularly wonderful place to be. Now, I stand corrected. I drive by there a lot, but I haven't been paying attention to lunchtime activities, Michael. You know, I have certain questions about the quality of that open space. And the other thing I would say is when you compare to Brigham, that passageway from the main door on, the main door is at Francis Street.
Yes.
Yes. And you go up one level and then you have I'm sorry to use the word bridges, but pretend I didn't say it. But the bridges that cross the street run along the south edge of the first building, cross another street, run across the edges of the what's the second building called?
So I think you're referring to Hale and Shapiro, and this passageway right there, which is in the newer part of the Brigham campus.
Yes, and I think that last building starts with FENNEL or something. My point is, I've walked that a lot, and it's wide open with lots of open air. I mean, you're not walking through a park, but you're walking through a space that is dedicated to open space and fresh air and everything. And so let's be careful not to, you know, kill the golden egg, as it were, where they've done a very nice job of creating open space, sun, views, and I don't see that as happening here.
So I think, Bill, that is very much in the idea of pedestrian or patient and visitor movement being exposed to daylight and clear wayfinding is very much in the spirit that underlies the planning of the project in this image here that Wendy shared about the third floor, and the idea that from the healing garden that Wendy spoke of that's in this location here, that the new projects that are supported by the master plan are very much envisioned of continuing that spirit of around Joslin Park.
Maybe we'll go on to Anne Marie.
Yeah, I would just add, I like my colleagues, I'm struggling a little bit with this one. I guess I would say that the rationale for what you're proposing to do is clear. However, I am hearing concern from my colleagues that I share about the impact on an already constrained situation. And I also understand that there are constraints as in terms of our review purview tonight. However, I guess this is a suggestion and a question. Is there, and perhaps for Seth and the staff, it seems to me that in order for us to feel comfortable advancing this project, we need to have some reassurance about attention to various aspects of it, you know, that are not within our purview right now, you know, be it connections, be it maybe the design. I also agree that I think better understanding, I think again, the success of this project will be highly connected to the design of the ground floor spaces. I'm just imagining, I saw one of my colleagues commented at a previous review about what's the visitor experience. And I think we're seeing a very diagrammatic example of it, but I'm just imagining, you know, somebody coming to this space who's already, you know, feeling uncomfortable, most likely, you know, what the quality of the space is going to be really critical to this, and dealing with and sort of how you design within these constraints is going to be very critical. So just try to sum this up. So could there be an opportunity to add some parameters to our, you know, if and when we advance this as BCDC, to address some of the concerns that my colleagues and I are voicing? Thanks.
David
Anne-
has seen.
Anne Marie, I was just thinking I might just comment a couple things. Just although we're not talking about the building, I can assure you that in the planning of the project, that the movement systems on multiple levels in the building are oriented towards the park and the public, particularly on the ground floor and even on some of the upper floors. So I just want to assure you that part of the life of the facility is something we're taking very near and dear into the thinking of the building and in the experience of the landscape and nature as you circulate through the campus. And I think that's something that Bill was talking about too with the Brigham, and that's very much part of it. Whenever we get to that next step, we can start to talk about that.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. I think my concern is I have a high degree of confidence that you will know how to, move people, processes through the space. My concern is about the quality of the space, and maybe there's some agreement that can be made or consensus around, so what are some of the characteristics or priorities? But I've said enough. I know my colleague David Hassine was ready to speak.
Go ahead, David.
Well, first of all, I want to apologize because I had a computer problem, so I joined late. So I could be rehashing old ground, and I apologize if I am, and if I do, just say so. Speaking for myself, I have a high confidence on the design of the building itself. That's actually not where my concern lies. It's actually with as I was catching Michael's comments about the streets that flank Joslyn Park as being essentially city streets that are no-go zones, and then the park itself feeling increasingly hemmed in. And this was something I brought up at the last meeting. My concern is actually about that area and understanding what options you've explored for Joslyn Park and the flanking roads as part of a master plan, because either this is a campus, we're looking at this as a campus, in which case the full ground plane, including the roadways, are part of the design problem, or this is a series of sites that just happen to be gathered up as part of the hospital's holdings, if you will. And the way, is there a possibility to woon-earth those streets? Is there a possibility to, build over them? Are there any possibilities for creating a higher quality green space for the future, for the next 50, just like we're talking about the next 50 years of cancer care, for the future of the facility and all the buildings that are circling around that red arrow? And maybe you talked about that, but it seems like what I'm hearing is that is sort of set in stone, or set in curbs, if you will, and that's that. Is that true?
Well, David, while I am not a land use attorney in our discussions to date, I believe that that to make modifications to the boundary or changes to the park itself that would incur reconfigurations of the streets or the curbs would require a move at the state legislature level. That the streets in the park are not ours. That you are correct, and that this is a series of discrete parcels, and that our project's influence, and we very, very much are on the same page with you in the project and both institutions' commitment to working with the Parks Department to improve Joslyn Park and make it a better asset. We're eager to work to move from the institutional master plan phase to the large project phase, to begin working with the Parks Department, to begin working with the BPDA, to come back to you with input from the streets and transportation departments on how we can do these. But you're correct that the limitations, and maybe it's very hard to understand with this project as opposed to an academic campus, and that we really are working on a series of parcels within the urban structure.
Well, okay, thank you. That's helpful. I guess I would like to get a little bit more clarity, maybe from Boston Planning at some future meeting or other. We're hearing a lot about, like, for example, at White Stadium, this was a public-private partnership, right? There was a partnership between the Parks Department and the City of Boston and so forth to deal with that particular set of issues. Arguably, this is as important, if not more important, to the city in terms of creating relief and meaningful green spaces that could theoretically have what's the word, agreements with its abutters in terms of care and taking care of it and all of that stuff. I'm having trouble. I'm having trouble with this as a master plan. I understand it as a building
Yeah.
proposal. I don't understand it as a master plan. And that's where I'm at.
I mean, David, I think that's kind of where we're all at. And, I guess I'm just curious about how much, how much, discussion with this or the state legislation has to change and all of that stuff. But we hear about proponents all the time talking about changing streets to include complete streets or to, narrow, roadways, to increase sidewalks. And I guess this is the conversation that we feel is missing from this master plan. And I don't know, and maybe Seth, you can help us weigh in, but I don't know if it's a conversation with BTD at a high level. It's just really just planning to ensure that the quality of open space is going to be improved and considered for, the next 15, 25 years. And sometimes it's not only Jocelyn Park. I'm really curious about Pilgrim Road. I'm curious if there's any improvements that you're thinking about Brookline Ave, thinking about, the connectivity from the open space, not physical connectivity from buildings, for improving the public realm. That's our focus. And so really, we'd love to just talk a little bit more about that.
Well, to speak a little bit from Boston planning point of view, we have certainly been working with the proponent along with BTD and engaging our peers at Parks Department as well with all of these exact same conversations to make sure that the commitments that the institutions are making, right, are consistent with the size of project that they're doing, and that, we're working towards some very significant, improvements to the public realm.
So Seth, just to be blunt about it, has it come to the conclusion that the curb lines have to stay the way they are?
I don't think there has been a conclusion.
Seth, is it fair to say, though, that the setting of curb lines and the design of the park would be part of the large project review and a series of multiple exchanges with the Parks Department, with the city, and with this commission to get to the details of the park? But that conceptually, we all agree that the park is the heart of not only these campuses but also of Longwood. That from a master plan versus a project standpoint, there's a continuum of discussion and dialogue, but that is on the part of the proponents here. We can say that both institutions are absolutely committed to working in this partnership with Parks and with the city and with you to work to maximize and optimize the benefit that this precious green space has in balance with all the requirements and necessities of the critical space that's required for both of these institutions to provide patient care at the highest level.
Certainly, Michael. Of course, at an ADD level, no specific designs are appropriate. Right, all of that specificity will be gotten into with ADB. As the commissioners, I think, have said, ADD level is indeed, the time for the master plan.
David Hassine?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that. Like, I think, maybe I'm stating the obvious, but I think that what feels like it's missing here is we understand that things are going to happen in a different sequence, that the priority is to get this building built, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I understand all that. The issue is as part of the schedule of the master plan as it unfolds over time, is there a plan, desire, intent on the part of the proponent for how these spaces will get transformed before, during, or after any of these buildings are actually built or implemented? So in other words, what I'm saying is, if I knew that your institution had a plan for Jocelyn Park that, let's say, completely changed the curb lines, the drop off, the way the way maybe, you know, maybe the parks push up against the buildings and the driveways, I don't know, like a transformation of the park that you have designed that you think is a significant improvement to the public realm of this area, and that is part of the intent. It would not prevent the hospital building from proceeding in the way that you have designed it or are proposing to design it, but it is something that we understand that the institution is going to be advocating for, working with the city and agencies to do. Right now, it feels like it's very hands-off. It's kind of like, this is a problem, we can't touch it, so we're going to be dealing with these other things. And I think that's where I'm feeling uncomfortable.
Well, I think, David, just to, without overemphasizing the point, because I know everyone's running late, I do want to share that the functionality of both projects of the space, including the new hospital and the existing Rosenberg, predicate the idea around patient care and the requirement to meet protected drop-off requirements that with the drop-offs on the left and the right and this counterclockwise circulation, there's very much a deep structure of how the buildings function that supports the idea of a park or green space at its heart.
I do see that the proponent's attorney has his hand raised. Diana, I don't know if you want to jump in before John or have John go.
John can go ahead. I'll make a comment afterwards. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is John Radigan. I am counsel for BIDMC on this project, and maybe a little bit more familiar with the ADG process than the rest of the proponents. So maybe I can answer some of your questions more specifically. With respect to traffic mitigation, I know there was some discussion about, are we going to improve the feel and the look of the West Campus, or the operations, I shouldn't say look, I should say operations of the West Campus. Yes, absolutely. Michael's skipped through the slide really fast, and he can go back to it if you're interested in it. But there have been some very thoughtful discussions with BPDA planning, or Boston Planning Department, and traffic about changing the curb lines along Brookline, changing the curb lines along Jocelyn Place, changing the intersection of Longwood and Pilgrim Road, which is item C, and improving the traffic situation at the Riverway and Netherlands. We think that these improvements, people are excited about these improvements in terms of the improving the way, in particular, Brookline Avenue and Longwood works together. I wouldn't want you to think that we haven't been thinking about this at a master planning level. We have definitely been thinking about it at a master planning level. And the mobility improvements are one part of that. With respect to open space, we have also thought about that at a master planning level. And the good news, as Michael said before, is that we have more green space than other hospitals. Most hospitals don't have very much. We have space along the Riverway, and we've had our landscape architects study that space and make recommendations for improvement. And they've looked at it. They've commented on our loading zones that are in the back. And so we will be improving, as part of the master planning exercise and the construction of the building, the landscaped area that already provides to people who come along the Riverway, whether they're jogging or driving or walking their dogs. That landscaped area will be better for this master planning exercise. Similarly, we're dying to do Jocelyn Park. We have a maintenance agreement now with the city, but we want to do much more. It's going to be the front door of two of the most important buildings in the BIDMC campus, the Rosenberg building and our emergency room on one side, and the new cancer hospital on the other side. And so we've identified Jocelyn Park as something that we want to work with the city to upgrade. It's not our park, as everybody has been saying, but that doesn't mean we can't upgrade it. Parks is interested in talking to us about upgrading it. They suggested that we start with a use study. So we did start with it. We did a use study of Jocelyn Park, and it's It is not a destination park. It's a pass-through park. We'd like to make it a destination park. So it's and that's where this, the specific conversations with parks will be headed. And similarly, when you see the design of the building, you'll see green space inside, just like you saw that on the Klarman building and the Yawkey buildings, the two most recent buildings constructed by these proponents. And again, Boston Planning has been pushing us to invite the indoors, the outside indoors, because there isn't any bloody space outside, right? And this is a very congested area, and these are hospitals, and every square foot is relevant, or is important. So I wouldn't want you to think that we haven't been thinking at a master plan about this stuff. I think we just, in the interest of describing a very big campus and a singular big building, we might have gone through it a little bit quickly. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me.
Diana, you want to go ahead?
I do, and I wonder, John, if you can stick with us here for a little bit more, because I do want to be very transparent with the commission as well in terms of the time constraints associated with this project and certainly what's before us. So I'm hearing loud and clear, right, that we need to think about what is that destination of Jocelyn Park, and maybe bring some early ideas to you all in terms of what that could be in terms of visuals. I'm also hearing sort of loud and clear that, sort of understanding what can be done at the ground floor. So we've shown you sort of the setbacks with the sidewalks, but anything else that can occur there to enhance the public realm is something that I heard loud and clear today. But I do want to sort of emphasize here a little bit of the time constraints with this project. And I wonder, John, if you can speak directly to the time considerations for what the IMP entitlement is going to enable for the project, which is really a zoning entitlement for use. And that when we are before you again here in the commission to review the building envelope and the associated improvements and mitigations associated with this master plan, we'll be getting into a finer grain of detail here as it's associated with these opportunities. But I think, John, it may be helpful to speak specifically, right, to what the IMP entitlement and what this Article 80D is enabling for the project and a critical deadline before us.
Okay, yes, sure. Thank you for asking that. So when we filed our IMPNF for this project, it was a joint filing, and we imagined taking the ADD master planning process and the ADB project review project as a singular effort. It quickly became apparent that people were very interested in this building, very interested in these campuses. And so at the BPDA suggestion, we split the zoning part, which is the ADD, from the ADB, which is, as you know, the project review piece, so that we could further advance the design of the building and answer some questions that we couldn't then answer without rushing the other piece of it. The reason we are rushing, this will be a one-year process, so rushing is in the eye of the beholder. But the reason that we have time constraints is that this project requires a state determination of need, as all new hospitals of this type would require. And that determination of need application was filed last fall, at about the same time we filed for the institutional master plans. And the state is going to be poised to issue the determination of need, assuming that they do, in December or January. And one of the questions, or one of the criteria for issuing a determination of need, is that your land is zoned for a hospital, for the use you're proposing. Right now, because of the quirky way the Longwood medical area has developed, this is a residential 8 or something like that. It's a very low density zoning. you can't use it as a hospital except through a master plan. And Jocelyn, of course, had their own institutional master plan. And so adding the Jocelyn Clinic site to the BIDMC West Campus will have the effect of saying, okay, this is now zoned for a hospital building. And we can tell the state that we have zoning for a hospital building, even though we have miles to go in terms of other project reviews, including most relevant to this group, the 80B project review, which we're eager to get into, and we'll probably get into it in the next 60 days. And you'll be seeing the building, you'll be seeing how the architects are thinking about inviting the outside in, you'll be thinking about how they deal with these corners and what an improvement this building will make for that critical corner in Longwood. So that's the hurry. We very much would like to complete the ADB process so that we can hopefully achieve a BPDA approval September, October, zoning a month later. And by December 1st, everybody on our side can breathe a little bit easier, that if the state comes to us and says, do you have your zoning? We can say yes. So that's the hurry. Thank you again for indulging me. Thanks for asking, Diane.
And I think
thank you very much. Oh, sorry,
Oh, I'm
Diana.
sorry, Anna. Just in the spirit of that, what I really would love to do is to help, and maybe Shauna, you were about to go here, is to help summarize specifically what we want to see back in front of the commission with great specificity. So this team has been incredibly responsive, and I think we're ready to be responsive in that way. But I also want to make sure that as a commission, we also understand the constraints with the ownership pieces here that are really constraining the site and what's possible, right? So I was hearing very clearly Jocelyn and the public realm connections there. I was also hearing that the Shapiro Plaza was another opportunity to sort of think of public realm connections and what can be done to improve those spaces. But I'd love to hear from Shauna and the rest of the commission to see what other additional specificity can we provide this team, because I think we all want to be as responsive as possible.
100%. Yeah.
It was really lay out those constraints and get a sense for how we move forward.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate the understanding the timing. I don't think that we're that far from, from where we need to be. I do think it will take probably one subcommittee. And Shauna, I'm just going to start, and please anyone add in, but I definitely think a really focused attention to, I think you heard very clearly, Jocelyn Way, the park, the open space at the street level, the ground floor uses of the new buildings, I think is pretty important. I'm super curious about the loading dock improvements that were mentioned, just out of curiosity, so we have that context. And if there's any thinking along Pilgrim Road, I think would be, in addition to Brookline Avenue improvements. I don't think you're hearing a lot of concerns about the building, but I do think, just to make sure that we're not missing anything, some distant views, maybe down Brookline Avenue to see massing and scale and height would be really helpful. I don't want that to be missed and somebody bring it up at the next meeting, so I'm bringing that up. And I do wonder if there's any open space to consider at higher levels of the building that would take advantages of the greenway that we should just know about, and think about how you're contributing to the public realm. Those are my recommendations for coming back, but any others?
Maybe the comment was made early in the presentation about valet parking, and therefore that raises the issue of underground parking, I assume. Should that be in that laundry list you just gave us?
I think so. I think access to parking, I assume there's 250 parking, spaces. And so access to that, access to loading, and then drop off, I think would be important for us to all be informed on.
But that would also be indoor valet rather than valet parking from the exterior.
Got it. Okay.
I agree with the summary, Amy or Mimi. But I would also in the spirit of looking at Brookline Avenue, I think a series of quite simple sections marching down the street, because I'm very curious how, we haven't talked about your building, how it approaches Brookline Avenue really at all. And so that just that overall character, the focus on Jocelyn, and then I think also that gray space along the building itself that's fronting onto the park would be also important to understand.
Excellent. We didn't ask for public comment. I'm just remiss that we probably should go back.
Yes, and Lizzie, if you could bring up those slides. So at this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and I will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function and dial 6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information. Please keep comments to 2 minutes. And I am seeing one raised hand, Allison Pultinas. Can you unmute yourself? Allison, we're not hearing you yet. You should have the ability to unmute yourself. Allison, are you there now? Looks like Allison is unmuted. Hearing some background noise there, so. Okay, Allison, I'm sorry. We're not able to hear you right now. Are you able to put anything in the chat? Okay, Allison, I'm sorry, we're not able to hear you for some reason. We will try to find your registration information and follow up with you after this call to make sure that we receive your public testimony and can then distribute it to the commissioners. Any other public comments? Seeing none, Mimi, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, I think we summarized what we're looking for the next subcommittee. You know, I do think that we want to see you soon. I will leave it up to, you know, Christina and Seth on what soon is, but I do think it's a very focused effort that we're interested in learning more about, and we'll be happy to work with your timeline and your constraint.
And can I ask one quick question? And I know we have you, David Hussing here from last time, and I don't know if you were able to listen to the proponent's presentation as it related to the height and massing. And I know you were sort of asking the question, are there opportunities to go higher to be able to create more public realm? And I just want to make sure that, you know, especially as they come back, you know, where we're coming back to the commission, we want to be as responsive as possible. And I think the one piece I want to make sure we share, or maybe you already heard, David, if you were there on the call, is just that we're also constrained by shadow limitations in this part of town, and that is what is dictating the height. So although I, you know, love the idea of sort of thinking about playing around with the height here, we are balancing a series of constraints. So I wanted to make sure you heard that from the planning department, as that's a really important sort of design element and criteria. We worked really hard with the team to sort of establish guidelines and make sure that we're within those.
Thank you. Understood.
All right, we have had a long evening, so maybe we move on to our next project, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank
And
you to
just-
the commissioners for your time this evening and for your comments.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
And confirming that this is recommended for additional review at Design Subcommittee.
Correct. And if you could have them come, as quickly as possible, we'll be happy to, again, work with our timeline.
Certainly. Okay. Commissioners, I know this has been a long evening and we have one very important project to consider, one more very important project to consider. Faneuil Gardens in Brighton at 89 Faneuil Street. This is both a 121A master plan and an 80B for the phase 1. It's also, this contemplates the redevelopment of a public housing site owned by the Boston Housing Authority. The proposed project contemplates the preservation of 258 existing income restricted units and the development of 183 new income restricted units. The proposed project would demolish 10 existing buildings and develop 550,000 square feet of residential and ground floor commercial uses, 441 units, in 5 buildings and 154 off-street parking spaces on a 7.8 acre site. This will be the third presentation of the proposed project to the subcommittee following an introduction at the June 4th monthly meeting and subsequent committee meetings on June 18th and July 23rd. Commissioners Gilly Smith, Haseen, Love, Lubenow, and Kim were present at the meeting and recommended the proposed project for additional review in subcommittee. Commissioners Haseen, Love, Lubenow, and Kim and Gilly Smith join us this evening and should be prepared to deliver remarks at the start of deliberation. It is my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves. A reminder to proponent teams that presentations will be limited to 15 minutes, and I will give presenters a halftime warning. And with that, I invite the proponent team to begin whenever ready. Thank you.
I'll just note that Anne-Marie Lubenow had to leave. The evening ran too long.
Team, you should be able to share your screen. Please let us know if not.
David, are you able to share your screen or shall I? I will do that in that case.
While you're pulling it up, I'll just remind the commissioners that I believe where we left it last, that we were really just going to focus on the one building that we are going through 80B approval. And, Bill Ron, I know you weren't at the last meeting, so by all means, you can chime in on larger site questions, but I think we were feeling comfortable with the plan. It was really just focusing on the materials and the architecture of the one building in phase 1.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you, Seth. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, commissioners. We just had an introduction, so I will go right into it. There's one slide that we want to show is that what we heard last time. There's a couple of things about the master plan, about the color strategy was mentioned, but also some of the guidelines that inform the future architecture of the building phases. About the landscape, Jen will talk a little bit. Talking about the central space in the middle of the master plan, but also how the landscape supports the color strategy. We'll provide a bit more detail on phase 1 landscape. And lastly, indeed, the phase building 1, how does that respond to the master plan guidelines, and how does the boulevard facing wings respond to the heart of the master plan? And lastly, we'll show some details for materials for that building. By the way, my name is Mick van Gemert. I work for MVRV Architects. We're working on the master plan, so I will start this presentation on that. As you might know, we recently did some changes to the footprint of the buildings. In red dotted outline, you can see the old footprint, and in blue, you can see the new massing. Some changes include the differentiation between distances between the buildings and some parking areas, but most importantly, I guess, is opening up the heart of the master plan to include more open space. That is really to make more space for this a boulevard space, that we call it, the central space that cuts through the master plan, but also connects all of the smaller courtyards that the master plan consists of. And lastly, of course, but very importantly, connects the community to the McKinney Park on the south. There was some questions about the colors, so we included a little bit of explanation for that. We noticed that on the north of the master plan, there's a very different color scheme than the south. On the north, you can see brick buildings, terracotta colors, brown, beige, whereas at the south, it's much of a cooler scheme on the buildings that surround the master plan. So light blues, light grays, greens. So we started to adopt, let's say, that kind of color differentiation of more warmer colors to the north and more cooler colors to the south into the master plan. And at the same time, sort of saturating some of those colors in the heart of the master plan, where those buildings stick into the courtyard, and keeping the ones on the perimeter more subdued, so that they really stay connected to the neighborhood as it is. That brought us to this scheme in a diagram summarized, having 5 different building phases adopting 4 different color schemes, and making sure that all of those building blocks have a slightly different color tone and material to them. We started to differentiate that color and material differentiation a little bit further by introducing a design guideline on material and color for different typologies. So some of these blocks have ground floor units that are directly accessible from the street or courtyard. And so we want to make sure that typological change is also expressed in the exterior and the material handling of that elevation. And the same thing for some of the typologies higher up in the building to also express that in the facade. So that brings another layer of sort of color and material differentiation more horizontally onto those blocks, bringing another sort of level of human scale to the master plan. Apart from that, we were looking for a playful facade design, or like different patterns that make every one of those blocks a little unique, kind of avoiding the very stacked sort of patterns that you see in the bottom of this slide. Making sure that all of those buildings have a very distinct window pattern, distinct color that fits within the tone of that face, and materialization. Sort of resulting in a very diverse, but at the same time coherent master plan. So I will just quickly touch on some of these guidelines that we have included in the master plan design guidelines that talk about how to design those directly accessible units and how to design those facades. How to differentiate, for example, units that are in the tops of the buildings, how to treat the facades of the units or amenities that face the central boulevard. There's rules about the amount of glass, about setting back those facade pieces, about integration of special corners. When you approach this master plan, what do you see first to make sure that that gets attention too. There are some design guidelines about landscape, about the boulevard protagonist, let's say this main space, also including color, similarly to the buildings, and of course prioritizing pedestrian experience. And lastly, some guidelines about how all the buildings should benefit maximally from the green surrounding them. So the buildings, we should really land in the green. And lastly, the special elements to activate the landscape. And with that topic, I'm going to hand it over to Jen to talk more about that.
Yeah, and I'm just going to quickly touch on 2 topics that were brought up at the last meeting. So we were asked to, you can go to the next slide. We were asked to zoom in on the Central Flex Plaza and just provide a little bit more detail. Can we advance the slides? Thank you. And you can actually just go to the next one. Thanks, Mick. So the Central Flex Plaza sort of recreates the central open space that the Faneuil Gardens community is currently using to gather and play, and with some notable improvements such as adding trees and shade structures, activating the space with game tables and grill stations and other amenities like that, and also providing infrastructure to support some of the big celebrations that they have at the community, such as their Unity Day event that they have every year. And then next slide. Oh, this is just a view of that Central Flex place from the phase 1 porch at the Wellness Center, or the Wellness Amenity Space. And And then just moving on to the question of the color story. So with regard to color, the landscape materials provide a neutral canvas of natural colors and materials that allow the architectural color story that Nick just described to really shine. We will incorporate limited pops of color that correspond with the adjacent buildings to sort of provide a sense of place. And then the boulevard, the central boulevard coloration, which will be further explored and developed during phase 2, will highlight that space as the heart of the community. Next slide. And then the plant selection will consider the color palette as well, sort of trying to complement the building colors throughout the seasons and really just trying not to clash with those colors. So in the next few slides, Andres is going to dive into phase 1, which I know is sort of what we're discussing today. And just to orient everyone, phase 1 is the area outlined in blue. The shaded blue area is sort of temporary landscape conditions that will be built as part of phase 1 to match the existing conditions.
Thanks, Jen. Next slide, please, Mick. So the beginning really of the architectural design, we started with the design guidelines, right? And the design guidelines are also sort of the manifestation of what we're about to present. So here are some of the guidelines that Mick already mentioned, and there will be some that will be more prominent, like window patterns and so forth. Next slide, please. So let's start by just sort of orienting ourselves. This is building 1. We have 4 volumes that were sort of given by the master plan. We have volume A and B, which are looking at Faneuil Street, and volume C and D that are more internal to the development. Next slide. Now, each of these volumes, of course, has different relationships and adjacencies that we wanted to take a look at. So A and D are perhaps the ones that would be more important to the boulevard, and we wanted to think about things about that. Then volume D has that direct relationship to Oak Square neighborhood, as that is the first volume that you would see driving down Faneuil Street. And volume C is more internal, but it also has the potential to have a relationship to the 960 Beacon Street RFP. And then A and D have the special facades. These are the 2 facades that would be looking at the boulevard, and we wanted to make them special and to activate the boulevard. And also the color strategy, as Meg mentioned, it's trying to follow what's happening behind the programs, be that different types of units or different program in the volume. Next slide. So we started looking at textures as a starting point. We looked at some international precedents and some local precedents, so to start to create human scale in our detail. But perhaps more importantly is this idea of the color and the blue. We started looking at terracotta, a glazed terracotta, as one of the materials, image to the top left. Blue brick, image in the bottom top, middle top, and how to detail brick with the blue tones, and as well as grays and sort of light blues with metal panel, corrugated metal panel, and even some examples from MVRDB in New York City at the Radio Hotel.
And Andres, about 5 minutes left.
Okay, bottom right. Next. We also, so as far as the materials, we're looking at volume A, we're looking at 2 tones of blue, and both of them being brick. In volume D, we're looking at the glazed terracotta. Volume C, we are looking at a mix of corrugated metal, and then back to brick on volume D. Next slide. Just a quick pause here to go back to the landscape and how Jen and we are working to make those 2 the blues and the landscape relate. Next slide, please. And then also, as far as the window fenestration, how is it that we're going to work and create this playful facade? Is it pairing 2 sets of windows? Is it changing the materials? How are we going to create that interest? Next slide. So one thing that we did know is that each volume had to look different, but we also wanted to create a sort of a cohesive elevation throughout the four volumes. So you would see that none of these patterns per the guidelines, the windows are not stacking, and so that creates that cohesiveness, but also each volume is slightly different. Next slide. So this is the elevation. This is the south elevation. This is Faneuil Street. This is what we presented at the last meeting, but now we are introducing color. We have volume A to the right, volume B to the left. Next slide. But I think what we wanted to emphasize here really was sort of the detailing, kind of like what guided our approach to the detailing of the building. On the first floor, that's where we wanted to add the richness to the detailing. So in here, we changed the brick to a stack bond. We push it in. We introduce also some solder coursing. We have a little bit of shadow. Sorry. And that's where we wanted to focus most of our attention for the detail, and then creating the contrast with the windows above having a much simpler detailing. Next slide. And as we sort of walk through the elevations, you would see that pattern. This is the west elevation where we have the terracotta on the right and the metal panel on the left with volume C. Next slide. And then if we zoom in, we see the same pattern. Now here we're looking at brick and terracotta, but you would see the richness in the detail at the ground level and simpler detailing on the top levels. Next slide. Now we're looking at the north elevation. We have, again, metal panel with brick on volume D. Next slide. And we focused on different parts, again, simpler detail at the windows and a little bit more on the ground level. Next slide. Perhaps on this elevation would be more important to highlight this area of volume D where we wanted to add more fenestration. Planning wise, we had a bike room. We also had a pet wash, and there's more glazing here. There's more detail. There's more depth in here in the detail. And again, up above, it's simpler. Next slide. Now, moving down to the east elevation, now we're looking at sort of at the special facades here. So let's zoom into the special facade on volume D. Now, at the first floor here, we have the amenity. Here we are creating depth by having sort of 3 layers, if you will. We're changing the brick coursing again. We're doing a stack pattern with the color. And up above, we dial it up just slightly in the windows, and we introduce a pattern between the windows to connect them. And then we have a Juliet balconies in some of the sort of the living room areas for residents. Next slide. And similarly, on volume A and the special facade, we have added shadows on the first floor. This would be the live work units and special detailing. And then up above, now we're working as it is a special facade. We're working with a gradation of brick pattern where we have inset bricks on the right side, and they progressively are becoming outward bricks, and we're creating that radiation as a way, as the additional detail and specialness. And with the windows, we also have the Juliet balconies on this facade. Next slide. These were the renderings that we already looked at. This is on Faneuil Street, looking towards the development and Market Street down. Now we're standing on McKinney Park, looking into volume A, building 1 on the left and building 2 on the right. Next slide. Back to Faneuil Street. Now looking on Faneuil Street, looking at building 1 and the boulevard on the foreground. Next slide. And then finishing up here with the site plan, just to show how much care we've taken into activating the first floor. All the single entries in the black triangles, through lobbies, amenity, and live work looking at the boulevard, and also the bike room and pet room. And I'm going to give it back to Jen.
And time is about up, so if you could please conclude.
Jen, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm just going to breeze through the landscape slides, and then we can always revisit as part of the discussion if needed. So this is just a view of phase 1 in the context of the existing condition. Next slide. This is just a zoom in, kind of showing all of the specific landscape features that would be built as part of phase 1. Next slide. A section through the phase 1 lobby and courtyard space, kind of showing the outdoor amenities as well as the relationship to the boulevard and future community center. Visualization of the phase 1 courtyard looking toward the lobby from the boulevard. And we'll just end on sort of just like the overall view of phase one for discussion.
Thanks, Jen. Commissioners, any comments? David Hassan?
First of all, I know it's very late and very late for some folks on the call. And I really want to, I had questions about the character. I'm going to speak to the architecture. I had questions about the character of the architecture because the renderings, which now I understand in much more detail, seemed a little diagrammatic about the color and the strategy. But I really appreciated the explanation of the context, how it informed the colors, the lighter perimeter, the richer colors inside, and the illustrations of how the materials would be deployed at windows and doors. And I'm very excited about it. I think it looks very rich, and while being simple. And I just wanted to thank the team for taking the time to explain that level of detail about the expression and the strategy that we can expect on future buildings. And I hope it's as rich on the future buildings as what we're looking at in this first phase. That's all.
Thanks, David. Maybe as others are thinking, I'm going to completely second that. I think this color strategy is very intriguing. I'm very excited to see how, it actually fully realizes once all 4 phases are complete, or 5 phases, whatever that is. And part of me is really, really appreciative of the consistency and the, rigorousness of this blue. I do wonder at moments you're just going to have to let up and, it's overwhelming, but that I think those are minor questions that I'm sure the planning staff can give you guidance. But I really, really like the consistency and, the playfulness of the materials. I am really excited about the actual quality of materials that you're using, and I really do want to make sure that they don't change to lesser materials. And that is something that I do want to keep an eye on and make sure and learn from. I mean, we want more housing, we want more beautiful housing, and if there is a lesson learned on how to include, materials that have this quality in other affordable projects, we need to know that as a commission. So I do want to keep an eye on that and how this finally gets realized. But I see that Ron has his hand up. I think you're muted, Bill.
I simply wanted to echo what Mimi just said. Bravo to community builders and to their design team here. And it's lively, energetic. The detailing is appropriate. The connection to McKinney Park is brilliant. And I think what Mimi said a moment ago is right on, that we need to encourage other affordable housing proponents and designers to bring the same inventiveness, all within reason, obviously. And so at an appropriate level, and this just is very exciting. So bravo.
I'll jump in after David. I can't figure out how to raise my hand, so after you finish, David.
David, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said my piece. I agree very much that about this issue about. I'm really interested to see how this plays out as a paradigm for potentially the challenges that we face in building attractive, affordable housing throughout the city. So I agree. That's it. I'll put my hand up.
And I'm, along with everybody else, very complimentary of the detailing and the material quality of the project. And I love color. That's also. So my question and hope is more at a master plan level. is, while there are certainly guidelines on color, I think if every single material was changing from building to building, it wouldn't be, from my perspective, as strong as if the brick could transform from building to building within different color palettes. I don't know if that's, that's not necessarily within this particular building to study, but from a master plan perspective, I'd really like to understand how, because there's a complexity, there's a richness, there's a boldness, and there's a risk in kind of putting all of these different colors together. I think having some level of material consistency could be a good way to approach the future phases. So that's one thing I'd like to understand, is if that is part of the planning at the master plan level. Then from an open space perspective, I think in the same way that the detailing makes and the specific materials makes the colors so exciting and believable, I don't feel that same level of development in the landscape yet. And I know we're just, focusing on the building one, but thinking about the color of the main plaza being in the middle, what is the way that that color is achieved? I sort of have a feeling that that space is a little bit, to the central space feels a little bit big. From a scale-wise perspective, I don't know if the furniture is movable, but I don't have as clear a sense of what that space really feel. If we moved everybody out, what does that feel like, and what is the material? And then again, with the building one space, I think it's more defined, but it's still, except for the one section, is a little bit hard for me to really understand the specifics of what the grilling space feels like, what the play space feels like, all the different elements of the open space. Sorry, I don't know what's happening with my voice.
I will say to that, Shauna, I think you're right on point, and what we are trying to say with this is that that is part of phase 2, where that heart and the boulevard will be built, or like that lower half of the site, let's say, that it will inform the upper half or the north side. And we would like to reserve the right to like do a proper study, and in phase 2 come to you all with what that color, what the coloration will be like and what materials will be like. What we didn't want was to hold phase 1 from moving forward, as we're hoping to go for funding in requests this fall to the state. We know that we're going to come back to you all on Article 80 for all buildings. So phase 2 will include the landscape for the entire southern part of the boulevard. And so we're hoping that the principles are there, but we will need to spend some good time on getting to that. But with what Mick is showing right now, and Copley will feel free to add more, but staying neutral with sparks of colors here and there, and then allowing just for the color to pop on the boulevard. That's kind of like the strategy. I don't know, Jen, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to elaborate on that is, I think that the landscape will have so much texture. We're kind of providing a variety of paving materials, and the buildings have so much texture and color as is, that we felt like something had to give, like you were saying, like someone was saying, that something in the building might have to give. I think the landscape might be someplace where it's just sort of creating that neutral canvas, having a few pops of color for the nod to the building color, and then really just allowing the boulevard, which will, as David said, which we'll elaborate on in phase 2, to be that shining, attractive, artistic, fun, colorful component.
The reason I'm asking that specifically is I think it's pretty hard to achieve color on the paving in the landscape. And so since it is such a major component of the landscape design, I'd like, some ideas of what you're thinking about.
Well, I think, I mean, again, strategically, we're showing some images as inspiration, but getting to the details
we want to make sure that when we do it, we think about it throughout. And again, we don't want to, we're hoping that full strategy, like the inspiration and the principles are shown today, but and kind of like the images, but we don't have more than that. And I mean, we feel like to make it justice to the space during when we come from phase 2, then it will be a very detailed study. And that will take a while, and maybe delay phase 1.
Maybe another way to think about this, what I'm seeing in these images is, some suggestion of a pop of color, but some of the perspectives sort of implied this, is that the landscape may not have to have, kind of the same boldness of color across the board. I share Shauna's concern about like saying the ground plane is going to be painted yellow, and then a year and a half later, what does it look like? But maybe there's a biophilic story about the landscape that's, that there's color to it, but it's there's some of the perspectives that it's almost like the landscape is this kind of could be this contrasting condition with pops of color, as you say, with like meadows that change color through the seasons, but maybe the cohesive stitch that holds all this together, because I think you may run into a problem if each of these kind of precincts of landscape hold their color kind of allegiance to their building. And some of your perspectives seem to imply like that there are these kind of biophilic landscapes that could kind of flow through this, through all the different precincts of color, even in the future. And maybe there are small hints with wayfinding or other things, but that it's something I see in the imagery that I haven't heard you articulate, but I could see that, except for slide 22, which I share a similar concern. But I think overall the project for me is very interesting, and I want to support it, and I kind of I'd like to be the first commissioner to say I think this should be brought to the full committee in the next month, because I think this proponent has come forward with a lot more detail than I've seen in a long time, and I trust the team to really come up with a kind of a character that's not just about color, but like a character of the place that I really believe in the imagery. And I would just vote to kind of say, let's let these guys do their work and move this project forward.
And Mick Young, sorry to slow your roll here, but before we go there, could we ask for public testimony?
Of course.
Lizzie, if you could bring up the slides. So at this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and I will call on you. If you are calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raise hand function, and dial 6 to unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project information, affiliation information. Please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Do we have any public testimony this evening? At 8:19 p.m. Commissioner Love, I am not seeing any public testimony.
Well, I think I support Mick Young Kim, what she recommended, but I do think there's a happy medium, to address some of Shauna's concerns. And maybe what you can add is a couple of thoughts in terms of a master plan, how you plan to incorporate color. We're going to let it up to you if it's in the pavement or the furniture. Is it a complementary color scheme, instead of blue being blue, is it blue? And I think if you just gave us a rule set with a couple of takeaways and design, strategies you're going to implement, I think that would really help for the landscape and for the continuity of our review in the future.
I think I support that, and maybe you can revisit that perspective that Shauna brought up of that central courtyard and do a little bit more work on that, so that you could share with us a little bit more information, because I do share her concern about that. But I would support kind of giving this team the opportunity just to bring that material to the full commission and for us to review it at that time.
I
And
agree with that, but I don't want to back away if color in the landscape is being used in a significant way in the pavement. And if you're sticking to that, I want to know what it is because it's so hard to achieve it. And I understand, David, that it is a different phase, but if it's a central component of the project, I think we have to know if it's achievable.
There are blue concrete pavers. They're very expensive, but they're quite beautiful.
I think we might go for the simpler and more neutral biophilic with touches of
think
color
so.
because you might make everything more easier.
See, I thought I would be
The
helping
whole
you guys
stuff. Yeah,
out with
thank you.
that.
I
And I
appreciate it.
didn't make that up. I kind of saw it in the imagery and I thought, okay, that's a different way to go, but I could believe it, right? That there are these maybe slender moments that reinforce the buildings, but that the whole thing, that the landscape is a more cohesive kind of, and nature has a lot of color to it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to just be paint.
Yeah,
Like you could have a yellow room with
Yeah, and
plant
what we want to
material
do
and
is like
things
make
like
sure that we make it special, whether it's color
Yeah,
or
that's
something like
right.
that, but like exactly. So I think
Yeah,
we'd love to
but
collaborate with you on
I
that.
think to kind of support what my fellow Commissioner Shauna is mentioning is that we do want to see this in the next meeting as part of the presentation, as a little bit more information about the landscape and just a little bit more work on it.
if I could weigh in, I also support sending this to the full commission, and I guess I would say that to to my two landscape colleagues and to the team, often we're relying on the landscape architects to bring color into projects because the buildings themselves are very neutral in terms of color. In this case, we have buildings that are very lively and very colorful. And there could be such a thing as too much color in this site. And that it could be that this is that occasion where the biophilic approach, the changing of leaves from green to yellow or whatever is enough in concert with the very rigorous architectural color strategy for the rest of the project. So I would consider that because I don't think, I can see pops of color and some of the furniture and some of the accents, but I'm not sure that broad swaths of color on the ground plane are actually necessary when we have such broad swaths of color on the architecture surrounding it. So, for what that's worth. But I am intrigued to get clarity on your strategy in the same way that the color strategy for the building was so clearly presented in the presentation today. And with that, I would echo Mick Kim's suggestion that we let this proponent come back to the full commission for an approval.
I think we're all, in agreement here, Seth, that this is
Great.
ready. With a little
So
bit
hearing
more
no
to-
additional comments, my understanding is the project is recommended for final consideration and vote of recommendation.
Correct.
Okay. Seeing that, I think that concludes our session this evening. I want to thank everybody who's still here for their time, but particularly the commissioners for, as always, their time, resiliency, fortitude, and insights. I know there were a lot of tough projects tonight, and I appreciate, as always, your fortitude.
Well,
I
if
want-
Mick is in the Netherlands, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. So I want
That's
to
what I
thank
wanted.
him for his fortitude.
Yes.
Sticking with us.
Right. That's right.
Very
That's
true.
right.
Thank you.
I
My
know
pleasure.
David and Bill, you and I, we remember we'd go until 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. So this is nothing.
The good old days.
Fine. It's fine though. We
Yes.
prefer the more civilized schedule that you guys
Yeah.
have set up for us.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your feedback.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, beautiful
Thank
project.
you. All
Thank you
right.
all.
We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.